Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Ignash Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Jay Sticky.
And Steven is going to kick us off with some kind of a story thing? Joke?
What? I just did something last night that most people haven't done in a long time.
Oh, did you go out to... Crap, what haven't people done in a long time because of COVID? You went out to a baseball game.
Does that sound like me?
No, it doesn't.
I went to a movie.
Ah,
that sounds like you.
Congratulations. Yeah. What movie?
Quiet Place Part 2.
Okay.
I was trying to get Phoenix to go see that with me yesterday.
It was fun. It had the same kind of thing from the first one where, like...
The reviews are saying it was better than the first one, which was baffling, because I was like, that never happens.
I think it was good. Like, to me, it's just one of those things. Like, the first one, my main gripe with was, like, why didn't they have anything smart planned? Like, you know, the fireworks was one thing to distract from the... I didn't mean to make this a long thing, but the only main... They do have a lot of, like, smart, clever shitness that I like. The one thing that they didn't do the entire time is, like, nobody throws things for a distraction. And it's like, you guys realize throwing a coffee mug also makes noise, right?
Yeah.
Your only noise doesn't have to be you shouting or you know, jumping on something to make noise where you are. You can make noise at a distance.
Yeah.
Other than no one ever doing that, it was really good.
Okay.
So... yeah, fun plot, fun everything. I was going to mention, though, about going to the movies. I guess maybe this wasn't the best movie to start with because, you know, there's a lot of quiet moments in
the Quiet Place.
The name. And you can hear the synchronized chewing of popcorn all around you. You can hear the people talking the whole time, you know, that aren't supposed, like the audience, not the movie. And I used to love going to movies, and I'll try it with another movie at some point, but maybe I'm not a movie theater person anymore.
I mean, you also have this weird thing where you hate all noises that people make with their mouths, except for talking, I guess.
That's not weird.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, fine then. I'm the weird one.
Well, I mean, that sounds
whereas
like
I just don't
misophonia.
care. Yeah, but that's like a weird minority thing. It's like claustrophobia, right?
I know a lot of people. I have misophonia, and I don't know. I know a bunch of rationalists specifically that have it.
I just think it's just more like it pulls me out of the movie. Like, the experience is lost because I'm like, I can't get immersed when I can hear you chewing and I can see the light of your cell phone over on my left, right?
Oh, fucking people are checking their cell phones?
Yeah.
I hate when people talk about... like, I'm okay with people talking about the movie. I hate when somebody's having an unrelated conversation during a movie, though.
Or even worse.
That's
Yeah,
just fucked up.
definitely.
Yeah.
But like a stupidly related... like 15 minutes in, someone leaned over on the... like, you know, there was only 4 people on my left side. It was a fairly empty theater, and it's like, yeah, this whole thing is like a sequel to the first one. And it's like, no shit. it's part 2.
Wait, how far in were you when this person figured this out?
At least 15 minutes.
Oh my god.
And I'm like,
I get
even
it.
even if you weren't here for the first one, which is fine, it's called Part 2.
Yeah.
Come on.
So was it like packed in there?
No, not even
no.
close.
Okay.
We went at 5:45, so I think that later shows definitely were.
Okay.
But even then, they had buffers between groups of 1 seat, which is close to 6 feet.
Jason and me went to Milk, which is the local goth club. Well, it's a club in general that has goth nights. We went there Saturday.
Been on their non-goth
opening
nights,
weekend.
and it's still full of lots of goths.
Excellent.
I think it is just a goth club that has plausible deniability as having other genres of music.
The pent-up demand for going out was fucking huge. There was a massive line out the door. It was...
I've never seen that many people there.
I have before, but when I see that many people, it's like well after midnight. Whereas this was just like packed from the beginning.
There was a line starting at like 9.
I showed up at 8:30, and I think I was like 40th in line.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
The line was going out like the door down the street.
There's never any cover before 10 o'clock. This time there was cover for everybody right at the start. The drinks were jacked up to like 50% higher than they normally are. And still people were just like, yes, yeah, we're here, we're dancing again. It was really cool, but yeah.
It was a cool vibe. Like, it usually has a cool vibe there. I like Denver in general, where people are just friendly and chill and like dogs. But this was just like, I don't know, you could feel how happy everybody was. And
nice.
There was a lot more goodwill for your fellow mankind.
So humans can go out again. Nature is healing.
I don't know if nature is healing.
Humans are part of nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Alrighty, so this week we are talking about
Tell us about these new teens.
the Teens 2.0. They're the same teens that have always been teens. So it's a pair of books written by Robert Epstein, and he's not the only one in this movement. These are just, this is where I came into it. The more scholarly one is the Case Against Adolescence, and perhaps I should have read that one because it would have probably quoted a lot more and had graphs and charts and all these other things. But instead I read Teens 2.0, which is very layperson friendly and has less in the line in the terms of like quotes and statistics, and has a lot of anecdotal stories instead, and then like it just has a big stack of appendices at the end of the book.
They're both written by the same person?
Yeah.
This is actually like, I wonder how common that is. It would be fascinating if more people intentionally wrote two versions of a book, the one that, the scholarly one and the like you said, layperson friendly one.
Yeah.
I'm just remembering how much better, literally, getting things done for teens. I have a copy of this book because it's so good. David Allen's like GTD, getting things done productivity system. But like when he was forced to write it for teens and like used pictures and diagrams and metaphors to explain stuff, and I actually like was like, oh, this is an excellent explanation of getting things done. So that's cool.
Do we, at the risk of saying hello, fellow teenagers,
I think it's what was it? Good day, fellow teens.
Okay, good day.
Hello, fellow kids. Steve Buscemi in 30 Rock.
Yeah. You guys remember being teenagers at all?
Vaguely.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. It wasn't good.
No, it was not.
I would not recommend.
It's weird because like the further I get from it, the more I remember just like the good parts. I'm like, oh yeah, man, I'd like to go back to that. But then reading this reminded me of all the shit bad parts, and also reminded me that there was a decent chunk of my life where I was literally suicidal, and one particular night, if I would have had access to like a gun or something, probably would have made it through the night. So I like,
shit.
well, yeah, I don't know. I'm over that now because I'm no longer a teenager. I gained some meaning and independence and in my life. But, I'm
glad you didn't have access. I didn't want to just push past that without saying anything.
Okay, yeah.
Glad it worked out the way it did.
Yes, me too.
The world's a much better place with you in it.
Oh.
Agreed.
Well, thank you. All right, that's pretty cool. Okay. Thank you very much. But for a long time, like, I just thought this is how teenage years are. This is how everyone is. And
how they've always been.
And how it's always been, yeah. And then I started reading this stuff and got eventually channeled over to this book. And I was like, oh, things don't have to be this way. Like, we're literally traumatizing almost everybody. And it lasts for decades. Like, I mean, I still have nightmares about being in high school sometimes, but
I have like school nightmares like at least once a week.
Oh my god, yeah. I'm at this point I think I'm mostly over it, but like this is a process that took literal decades, and it kind of sucks if we're subjecting almost everyone to this sort of crap. And anyways, I'm here to talk about all this and how badly we're fucking up everybody and what we could do to not do that.
And I can insert some levity since that was kind of heavy to get us started. So the author is Robert Epstein. And when I glanced at that, I was like, oh, Jeff Epstein. Of course he wants us to treat minors as more adults so that he can, not be in trouble for fucking them.
You're a bad person, Stephen.
I'll own it. But
Injecting some levity, huh?
I promised I'd follow it up with another joke. The founder of my company, his name was Jeff Epstein.
Oh.
And so his name's still on a bunch of stuff of like, old test accounts, some of the like bill invoices. Mm-hmm. And so still most weeks I'll see Jeff Epstein somewhere in the company. And so I love that I'm sure when we're marketing this, people, it's like, oh yeah, not that Jeff Epstein. I'm sure our marketing people have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Different Jeff. Just to preface the conversation, I think I probably agree with the points made in this. I read some of the notes. That said, I think I can do I've been taking the virtue of the ideological Turing test more to heart in the last several months. I think it's super valuable. The idea that you should be able to properly engage with somebody that you disagree with. One technique for really getting where they're coming from is if you can pose, like, basically in your head, or especially a dialogue with somebody, pretend to be somebody from that group well enough that they can't tell that you're pretending. Mm-hmm. I will do that for the large part of the status quo, I think.
Okay.
All right.
Trying to keep us honest, ask the questions, all that.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I was worried that this was going to be one of those episodes where just all three of us are like, we agree with this book. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's the podcast. Except now we're going to just agree. for 2 hours.
Yeah, we're going to just sit here and jerk each other off for 3 hours about how kids aren't taken seriously enough or something.
Basically.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to let that happen.
Okay, so let's start with a quick hypothetical is the way that I got into this. Like, if someone...
Yeah, I love quick hypotheticals.
Yeah, if someone right now told you that for the next 5 years of your life, you couldn't do anything that had any meaning at all, it might be kind of, demoralizing. The least demoralizing would be the least of the terms I would use to describe it. Like, along the lines of, you can't really do anything that matters to anybody you care about. You can't make the world better or worse. You can't contribute to your society or your friends or your family. You can't own your own property. If you need food or clothing or shelter, that'll be provided for you. But also, anything you own can be taken away. You can't pay your own bills or make your own money. And if you try to, that'll usually be taken away from you. You're just stuck waiting for 5 years to pass before anything can happen in your life at all.
And you got to go to school.
Well, I mean...
Fuck that.
You might have to go to school too, but I'm not even, including school in the equation right now. It would feel to me a lot like fucking Groundhog Day, because no matter what he did in any single day, it didn't matter. It all got reset the next day, and it led him to suicide eventually, and that didn't take either, because nothing he can do matters, not even killing himself. And obviously it's not to that extreme because we don't have magic powers in the real world, but for the most part, nothing you could do would matter. You couldn't even have legal consequences for most of what you do, unless you do something really bad, in which case you get treated like a normal person again. But no one even takes anything you say seriously. In part, that's good, so that you won't have reputational effects later in your life for bad things you do now. But on the other hand, you can't. On the other hand, nothing you can do is nothing you can say or contribute is taken seriously either. And I don't know. I personally would get really depressed.
I have one funny quick thought on that, and then one serious challenge to that. The funny quick thought, you mentioned Groundhog Day. I saw one of those last week or this week. Movie that was called Boss Level.
Okay.
Starring the guy who played kind of Captain America's antagonist from S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America Winter Soldier.
Okay.
Big, brawny guy, short black hair.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah. Rumlow is his name, but I literally have to look it up. His name in the show. I forget his name in real life. Anyway, it was a fun Groundhog Day movie. Strong recommend. I think it was on Hulu.
Okay.
Boss Level.
I love Groundhog Day movies.
Yeah. And second of all, I don't think that he's remotely accurately describing what it's like to be an adolescent. Almost all of that sounded like dog shit. Like he's painting like this ridiculously absurd corner where you have to agree that this is bad.
Okay.
And then, the first part was nothing you do matters and you can't make your own decisions and you can't impact lives or something. Mm-hmm. You can absolutely do that at 15.
Not legally.
No, of course you can. You can join, the Science Olympiad, Math Club, Chess Club, make friends. You can win national competitions at 15.
You can make friends, but unless you're actually the person who's winning national competitions, what can you really do?
Well, that's true of adult life. You can't.
Adult life, you can. So one of the examples given is a kid who grew up in Mexico that around the age of 6 started helping out. Selling things on street corners, and he eventually made it really big in life, became owner of some major company. But anyways, just selling stuff on street corners, and
that kid's name, Mark Cuban.
Yeah,
sorry.
He would get money to help pay the bills, to pay the electric bill for his family and help buy food, and felt like he was really contributing something. And kids that can work with their parents or work on farms actually do something meaningful that improves the lives of their family when they're doing it. Whereas if you're, going to competitions, I mean, if you make it to the very top, you have something to put on your resume later, I guess, but it's not like anyone else's life is positively impacted by what you're doing.
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say that you can't have a positive impact before you're allowed to have a gainfully employed job. Because gainfully employed jobs, the vast majority of them don't impact anyone's life positively. Unless you're a particularly chipper checkout person at Safeway, you're not making anyone's life that much better, right?
You have some ownership in your life, and you actually can make people's, your family's life better just by contributing to paying the expenses.
So in those limited capacities, sure, but mm-hmm. as a kid, this sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, but it's only because it's relevant. You mentioned you had a rough night in your youth where you were very seriously suicidal. There was a kid, I was in junior high, told me he was going to kill himself. And it was, the long story involved me, like, almost getting in trouble for talking in class. And the principal was in the, I'll tell the medium link version anyway. The principal was in the class just like observing or something. And the teacher told me like, hey, stop talking back there. And I was like, actually, it's really important. I was like, well, if it's so important, talk to the principal about it, because the principal was there. And like, go sit in the back. And then I sit in back with him. I was like, so do you want to hear what it was about? And he was like, sure. And so I was like, well, we should leave the room. And I told him, and he's like, well, which kid was it? I was like, he told me not to say. And he's like, well, look, this is really important. Like, if he goes home and dies, this is on me, because I could have stopped it. Well, he said, quote, this is on me. And the implication was this is also on you, but I don't think he wanted to say that to a child or an adolescent, a young adult.
Did you tell him who it was?
Yeah. Oh. And the kid and I got along great for the rest of our primary school education. And I don't know if he was going to kill himself that night or not.
Yeah.
But there's a non-zero chance that he was.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it was or wasn't, clearly something wasn't going right for him.
Yeah.
And he needed help.
I don't know if it solved his problems or not, but he went off and he went and talked to the counselor, and he came back, gave me a hug sometime, either later that day or the next day. And, I'm hoping that this helped him, helped his life. I wasn't gainfully employed. No one paid me to do it.
Yeah.
I mean...
No, you did a great thing.
And I did that without being able to have a job.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I could very easily imagine that scenario not having that happy ending, though, where if, like, the adults hadn't taken you seriously, if they'd just been shut up, stop talking in class. Like, I've definitely had that happen. Not that exact scenario, but I've had abusive teachers. Or just incompetent ones.
Yeah, it totally could have gone that way too. Some teachers I had in some institutions I was at sucked, but this was a positive moment in my. This probably like school sucked in the most part. You mentioned how like you look back on it with like rose-colored glasses, and I think other than the bullies and the boredom, I had a good childhood. There was a lot of running around outside, goofing around, a lot of doing stupid shit that you can't get away with as an adult. But anyway, I guess I'm bringing that up as a counterpoint. So yes, the 6-year-old is able to contribute to his family's food income, which I think is a horrible responsibility to put on a 6-year-old. Like, no, you need to hit this quota or your family is going to starve. Yes, it's on you.
Certainly not how it was put.
Yeah, I think it's not. The kid is being forced to do this. Like, it seems like the actual crux here is the autonomy question.
Yes.
It's not sort of whether, a childhood where you work. Does this make sense? Sorry, I'm trying to...
It does make... I'm gonna stop trying to make my own tortured, terrible metaphors and just go into the actual argument in the book, because it's done better than what I've been doing so far.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hit on that too hard.
No, it's fine.
No, that's your job.
Yes, it is. So his argument is that the main need teenagers have is to become productive and independent. And that this is something that starts happening for most people somewhere around 12, 13, where they start wanting to gain their own lives and just gain some autonomy.
When you said starts at, usually we said, 12, 13? Mm-hmm. Like, I would argue, or not argue, clarify puberty.
Around, yes.
Like, it's the actual, like, physical and mental changes that cause someone to become an adolescent are caused by the process of puberty.
Yeah, I shouldn't put an exact age on it, because actually one of his major things in this, in one of his major arguments is that the physical number of years you've been on this planet is an absolutely horrible metric for almost any of the things that we just put an age on, and should be instead based on the maturity of the child, which is in large part due to puberty. So yes, I should say more like when you have when you're in the mid to late stages of puberty.
So, I mean, this kind of brings us back to our last episode about gauging mental aptitude / maturity.
Yeah.
Is this going to be like Game of Thrones, where it's like, has she bled yet? And like, so then that's like the question of whether or not she can get her learner's permit at the DMV. The clerk gets to ask, we can get into this later if you want, because it does come up later. But I mean, the main question as to whether you can get your permit at the DMV is, are you able to operate a vehicle? And that's the only thing that should matter for a license, and that's the only thing that would be considered, as opposed to how many days has it been since you popped out of your mom's womb. When you say now we're getting bogged down, but when you say operate a vehicle, that's different between operating it and operating it well.
Yes.
Okay.
Operate it well enough that society says you're allowed to do this.
Okay.
There's definitely some adults that should not have a driver's license.
And there are a lot of
That should
kids
not be an age thing.
who sat on their parents' lap, in an empty parking lot when they couldn't reach the pedals and got to turn the wheel and stuff, I could operate part of the car, but you'd be insane to let me tie wood blocks to my shoes and drive like Short Round from Temple of Doom, right?
Well,
I think being physically not tall enough to reach the pedals means you probably aren't ready to drive a car yet, but
yes.
I would say that I know plenty of 13-year-olds who I would trust to drive a car.
A lot of this is a combination of both experience and literal physical maturity.
Aptitude.
Yeah. Like if your body is there and your brain is a part of your body.
Okay.
So, yes, he goes into the fact that this is like the main thing that teens are supposed to be doing and is kind of how it has happened all throughout history. And let me just jump into the history thing real quick. That up until the Industrial Revolution, there wasn't really a term for adolescence. There was like young adulthood, and people would realize that people who had just gotten to adulthood were still, inexperienced, would make some dumb mistakes, but there wasn't this protracted period between childhood and adulthood called adolescence that is just full of drama and terribleness and is its own phase where someone is kind of stuck in this limbo period. And he says that of the 168 societies, pre-industrial societies that were recently is relative, this book was published in 2006, but that were studied, over 100 of them didn't even have a word for adolescence yet, and most of them didn't have a recognized period of all this drama and confusion and rebellion that teens go through, and instead the teens just kind of transition into adulthood, and the closer they are to Western societies and more industrialized they become, the more and more they start getting the same sort of pathologies that we have right now. So he believes that this is a very modern thing, very modern meaning in the past few centuries. And goes into the history of how exactly we came to have an adolescent period, which is pretty interesting in its own. But before we get to that, and if we get to that, he's mainly saying that in the pre-industrial society, people would, as they joined adulthood, just start transitioning into their own adulthood, where they started learning skills and, they had been working alongside their parents or some other adult members for the entirety of their lives, and didn't have that much of a problem transitioning to being their own autonomous individuals, whereas now we specifically have customs and lots of laws. He journals the increase in laws starting in the, I believe, 1880s, and then having a huge jump in the 1960s that drastically restrict what children can do and strip them of their rights. And
otherwise called protect them.
Yes.
The first example he gives is a really good one.
Okay.
Where, I don't mean to put too big of I got to raise a flag here.
Okay.
Mary Ellen Wilson was a 9-year-old girl who was beaten daily by her foster parents.
Mm-hmm.
In 1874, mission worker Etta Wheeler took it upon herself to rescue Mary Ellen, but the authorities were uncooperative. No laws existed that prohibited such abuse. As a last resort, Wheeler approached the NYSPCA for help. Berg took the case, arguing to a New York Supreme Court justice that Mary Ellen deserved protection as a human animal. Because
they did have protection for animals at the time, and the NYSPCA was one of those animal protection committees.
Yeah. And first of all, it sounds like, what was her name? Weller or Wheeler? Etta Wheeler sounds like and then Jane Addams later. She sounds like a fucking hero. Helped found the ACLU, helped found the AACP. She sounds awesome.
She does.
So, but when I say laws, not just holding them back, in this case, the law was holding her back from the freedom of getting her ass whooped every day and no one to complain to, right?
Yeah.
So in many cases, this actually did help.
Initially, yeah, they didn't have any child protective laws at all. Children were treated more like chattel, that they were their parents' property. And yes, but also it has come way too far in the opposite direction. This Adams lady that you're saying of, who was vital in all sorts of reforms, he does praise her for starting up these organizations and making a huge impact in the world, but also she was one of the people who was very much along the lines of children are completely helpless and should be protected from themselves, and started pushing for all these laws, which eventually got passed, including creating brand new crimes which didn't exist and didn't hurt anyone and were defined as crimes against the self, which included things like going to movies or dance halls, staying out past a certain hour, and behaving quote-unquote incorrigibly. So she was very much of the Puritan, we must protect people from their own sinful nature kind of thing.
There's definitely a way to turn it up to stupid.
Yes.
But having no threshold sounds like a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The argument is that our threshold now has gone way past stupid and is continuing to get even worse.
I would say it's better than it sounded back then. Now we can go dancing, we can go to the movies, etc.
Mm-hmm. Well, teenagers though, like,
you're not allowed into milk if you're.
I was gonna say, yeah, there were some 18-year-olds, or probably younger, about like these dudes behind me were like, "Hey, did they let 18-year-olds in here? Like,
no, they
have you been
not.
here before?" And I was like, "No, they card you at the door."
Yeah.
I was like, "Well, why?" Like, I guess because they serve alcohol, and it's like, yeah, we weren't gonna drink, and I was like, it doesn't matter. Like,
you don't count as a human yet.
Yeah.
We can keep rolling. I wanted to. I mean, unless we want to drill on that particular example. I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't know if it's the fact that the establishment milk bar thinks that 18-year-olds aren't, or 17-year-olds aren't people, or whatever.
It's also illegal for them to. It's below 21 actually. 21 is the drinking age.
That's my point. Yeah. So it's not like it's not like every institution seems to buy into this. It's like, no, sorry, we'll lose our liquor license and our business will get shut down. So no can do.
I mean, the laws are the problem.
I mean,
like, if I wanted to do anything as a kid, I'd have to ride my bike. I used to ride my bike 45 minutes to go to the library. Like, there's a restriction there just on, like, I could have gone to movies and gone out dancing, but I didn't have transportation. And they didn't have, like, good public transit in Jersey. Yeah, so I was just kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, public transit in Fort Collins, where I grew up, sucked, but it was at least existent. I had a friend who was in second grade. He'd take the city bus to the, at least to the bus stop, or maybe all the way to school. I don't know, how old are second graders? Like 11? Like, so he, at the risk of just saying, yes, we should infantilize every child forever, I'm definitely, in the camp of Jonathan Haidt, where, we're coddling kids way too much. Mm-hmm. But I will do my best to play the role of the person who does think that some coddling makes perfect sense and should be upheld.
Okay. So,
but don't put words in my mouth, Discordians.
The primary initial argument is that children, soon after they hit puberty, are ready to start taking on adult roles and want to do that. And nowadays, society does not let them and represses them and has taken away all their rights and just puts them more and more through this coercion and through this saying, you are still a child, you can't do anything, and we must protect you from yourself. And this leads to all sorts of pathologies, starting with young people in their teens often have absolutely awful relationships with their parents, since the parents are the jail keepers that have been appointed by the state as the people who have to, keep their teens under control, or they will get fined or go to jail. And it starts causing pathologies for people as well to have these basic needs thwarted for years and years on end like that. And he says that you can generally track the emergence of full-blown pathological Western-style adolescence in countries that are undergoing Westernization, and then give some examples of these pathologies. And, I mean, I think we can probably think of our own teenage hoods as examples of this, but he goes ahead and lists a bunch of statistics. He says, crime rate rises in teens until peaking at age 18 and then dropping steeply. The peak crime for almost every single crime out there is around 18 years of age. He says rates of most substance abuse peak at about age 20. Rates of automobile accidents and fatalities are highest in the late teens. Rates of sexually transmitted diseases are peak in the early 20s. 2/3 of all STDs are contracted by people who are under 25. Spending on behavior-altering drugs for minors has now edged out spending for all other drugs, including antibiotics, medications for asthma and allergies, and skin conditions for minors. More than half of high school juniors and seniors drink regularly. As of 2008, I guess this was published in 2008 then, about 20% of American high school students smoked cigarettes. Suicide rates for 15 to 24-year-olds have tripled in the last half centuries, even as rates for adults and elderly have declined. And for every youth suicide completion, there's nearly 400 attempts. 40% in 2007, 40% of American teens were treated for major depression. The peak age for sadness among American adults between the ages of 18 and, the end of life, the peak age for sadness is 18. Between 18 and 22% of young people have purposefully injured themselves.
Peak age for sadness? Like you ask people in their 40s, when were you the most sad? And the average was 18?
They start asking at 18 and then just, keep going after that. And peak age of sadness is 18 because that is, the time when you're closest to being a teenager in their age cutoff.
That is one explanation.
That is one explanation.
That is something I'm going to hammer on a bit when we get more direct towards it. I'm not convinced that this is the cause of a lot of these problems.
Okay.
At least not yet. Maybe I may be convinced.
Well, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. That was, the vast list of pathologies, and all we need to do, I'm assuming, is think back to our own childhoods or look at what society has as their stereotypical view of the teen to realize that this is a time with a lot of pathology, and your argument is that it comes from something else.
I'm saying that it's not convincingly argued that it comes from treating them like kids.
Okay.
I'm not saying I have the other cause. I can think of some, but one jumps out at me. The rates of automobile accidents and fatalities are highest in late teens. That to me sounds like we shouldn't be letting people in their late teens drive. If they're running around killing people.
If you wait to let it go even longer, I think you're just going to push the age out even more further.
Maybe. There's something to be said about, and I think there's a section here in your notes about the teen brain, because
impulsive behavior.
Well, and just your brain's not done developing. You don't have a frontal lobe yet. You technically you have one.
That's actually a misconception. To some extent, like the teen brain is different, but they had characterized it before as teens behave this way because they're undeveloped, but it's actually a specific there are specific brain changes that make you a teen that evolved for sorry Wes specific purposes of encouraging you to leave your tribe of origin and go find a mate with better genetic diversity. And the risk-taking and impulsivity is like because you're gearing up to basically go to war with nature or other humans. Like,
I mean, one could argue that you might want to keep a tight leash on those folks then. I'm not making that
trying
case,
to leash them is
makes it
what
worse.
They're arguing causes these pathologies. And I think you do actually see, they're talking about pre-industrial societies, that they don't have this like teen problem that we have in the West.
Yeah, the thing that I find a bit more convincing as to why these are the causes of the problems rather than something else is partly because there is the whole before industrial society we didn't really have this, and other pre-industrial societies don't particularly have it. But also when this is taken away, people tend to do a lot better. And he specifically calls out Boys Town as one example. There's a few other societies like this in the early 1900s where instead of sending young offenders to jails, they would send them to these societies. And the Boys Town in particular was interesting because he said all these young people were just put in a town without any locks on the doors or fences around it or whatever. But they were like, you live here now. Go for it. And their courts were other teens. The judges were teens. The advocates were teens. The advocates or lawyers, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, like
the jurors were teens. Yeah, the trash people that collect the trash every day were teens. And he said as soon as they started like being treated like adults with real responsibilities and real things that mattered happening to them, the vast majority of them started acting like normal people without all these, I'm sorry about the term normal people, maybe that's a stigmatizing, but they immediately became much more socially integrated and law-abiding and, importantly, happy with life. And it was a great rehabilitation program, which unfortunately has been captured. There is still a Boys Town now, but it's basically like any other juvenile detention system where they are still treated as kids that have to be watched and protected, and there's a huge amount of counselors that make all the decisions that matter. It was a very interesting case study, and he has multiple examples given where once you give people responsibility and the ability to affect things around them, they very quickly start acting like decent people again. And I mean, personally, the thing that helped me get over my mental situation was I dropped out of college because college was still a world where things were provided to me and what I did didn't matter. Once I was out on my own, making my own money, paying my own rent, it suddenly felt like I had ownership of my life, and my decisions made a difference, and I really quickly rebounded after that. And, when you have to clean your own place, or you're living in filth, you have to take out your own trash, or the trash just builds up, suddenly there's actual consequences for the things you do with your life, and that feels good.
Yeah, I mean, there's something...
No,
please.
Go ahead.
I was going to say there's something, rewarding might not be the right word, but validating, when the pantry isn't magically filled every week, and you buy your own food, if you're out of toilet paper, that's your problem. You need to go get some. Mm-hmm. It gives you a sense of authority over your life. Mm-hmm. I can dig that.
And not just the fact that, it feels good, but the fact that this is what humans are supposed to be doing at this point, and taking that away from them causes all these problems.
Yeah, I think you see this in any population where autonomy is withheld, taken away, minimized.
What happens?
I was just thinking about the prisons in the Netherlands, which just the regular adult prisons. I think it's the Netherlands, that might be Sweden, but they basically have a prison system where it's open doors, no locks, no barbed wire. People sort of work at jobs, and they can come and go as they please and make their own decisions. And people reform in these conditions where they get worse the more you restrict them.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking old folks' homes, that you've seen this psychologically over and over.
And there's some people that you can't have like that. You just have to get rid of them. Like El Chapo maybe. But in American prisons, when we do the same thing that we basically do to teens, they're famous for the intense levels of drug use. That's the only thing you have to do as you have waiting for the time to run out before you can get back to life. Tons of drug use, violence, suicide, self-harm. They're horrible torture factories, and this is a big cause of that.
Yeah, prisons are their own box of worms that I'm not going to defend, or can of worms. That's a whole mess. You mentioned old folks' homes. There are definitely people in these in say a secure psych facility or some nursing homes where you want the doors to lock from the outside. Because if your grandmother wanders out and drowns in the lake adjacent to the property because she doesn't know what decade it is, I think it makes sense that the institution's at fault. So I don't want to lump in.
Yeah, I don't think we're disagreeing though. This book is not saying immediately emancipate all teens. No. It's saying competency. I think that you should do competency checks for teens to see if they can do something, and for elderly people. The driver's license is a good example. Definitely, there's a lot of people on the road that should not have a license, and I think there's plenty of teens who could drive a car safely.
Yeah, I was struck with your example of Boys Town and tried to skim the Wikipedia page, but it's too big. I don't have much to comment on that. Half of Robert Epstein's Wikipedia page is about him suing Google because they put a warning on his site that his site was full of malware.
Oh.
When, in fact, it was.
Okay.
And so he was like, you guys are lying, trying to, make me look crazy. And it's actually, no, it looks well, I was hacked. This isn't fair. He sounds kind of like a crank, but that's also me just trying to observe this through the lens of this guy's not right. So I didn't read the whole thing on that either.
Yeah.
But...
it sucks about the malware on a site.
I just think it's funny. I didn't do it. It's well, actually, no, look. Well, I was tricked. I was hacked. It's yeah, that's what everyone says. Anyway, where was I with the...
He also cites a study that shows a large positive correlation between infantilization scores and psychopathology scores. That the more teens are treated like children, the more signs of psychopathology they show.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I was... without being able to read the study, I don't know what... a lot of this sounds like... Zimbardo arguing that the environment makes the person, right? Mm-hmm. And that's an example of a crank who's just spent his whole career trying to make a point that is probably wrong. And one red flag for a crank, this isn't it's never proof, but if they've dedicated a ton of time trying to prove the same thing for decades, mm-hmm. Especially when it's not accepted, mm-hmm. Granted, that is how a lot of cool new correct things come out. But it's also a sign of a crank. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that this isn't not even close to proof positive, but it is evidence that this guy's just got an axe to grind like Zimbardo, right?
Does it help that he's not the only one? That there's a bunch of other people also on this boat?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I was going to dismiss him as a crank on this one thing, but it is a sign of crankdom. Let's see. There was a grander point I was going to make about something earlier. I mean, one of the things about pathologies around 18 and stuff, I mean, so...
No, in the teens.
Right.
Before you have the ability to legally control your life.
Well, I mean, that's why I wanted to see what the specifics of these were. And for the record, I didn't know the name of this book until 2 days ago, so I didn't get a chance to go in and like do any real research. But like the idea that LSD can, if you have a propensity towards schizophrenia, LSD can trigger it.
Mm-hmm.
That might just be bullshit because like people experiment with drugs in their early 20s, usually mid 20s.
Yeah,
and that's when schizophrenia manifests.
Schizophrenia.
Yeah, so like if people are getting pathologies that are showing up in their late teens and early 20s, like that's also just when these things often arise. Schizophrenia being one example.
The specific pathologies start to drop off after 18, since that's when people start getting rights.
And you
say since then, but you haven't convinced me that since then.
You don't see the pathologies in other cultures. At least not at these rates.
I was curious. That was
the more Western they get, the worse they get.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask. When you say industrialized, can you explain what that means?
In
like electricity, jobs.
Basically, the closer they get to American culture and adopting
public schools.
Yeah, public schools are a really big one.
Sure.
And
I mean, because like
stripping young people of rights.
Yeah, I mean, like in 1874 or whatever, there weren't a lot of car crashes. So like that's kind of seems like. I mean, I'm obviously poking fun, but it's a bullshit statistic to say, look, 150 years ago, kids weren't having these auto accident problems. It's like, well, of course they weren't. Mm-hmm. There weren't cars to crash into each other.
Yeah.
So
he has a really interesting example given for the Inuit culture. And I mean, we're kind of using industrial and Western interchangeably here and as a shorthand for what's been happening over the past couple centuries. But he says that this is happening to Inuit cultures as well. And it's, quoting him, especially unsettling because it cannot be blamed on either urbanization or industrialization because Victoria Island has experienced neither one. Television, forced schooling, and social security were enough to decimate the traditional culture and to create the new development stage we call adolescence. So it was the fact that they have the forced schooling and the taking away of traditional rights that people had that started making them have this adolescent period of drama and terribleness. So even though we're seeing industrialization, it doesn't necessarily take actual industry. It's just the culture that has evolved since industrialization became a thing.
And what he said, it was Social Security and television?
Television, forced schooling, and Social Security were the major changes that came to Victoria Island.
Yeah, I want to say something about Social Security, but Stephen, did you?
I was just going to point a skeptical flag at TV and Social Security being proximate causes of badness.
Those were just the three major changes he listed.
Right. So, I mean, if I had to guess, the problem would probably be forced schooling. I mean, unless we're arguing that, no, Social Security gives people a safety net, and safety nets make people weak and sad, so we should take rid of those.
Right, gotcha.
No, I think what they're saying is, like, television, for example, is projecting this, like, image of youth culture. Mm-hmm. They talk about marketing, sort of, spreading this misconception about teens. And
it basically reinforces everything we think about teens.
Yeah, and the Social Security was, I think, about the workforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, actually, this might not be the same point, but I thought it was interesting that the book talked about the way that, like, there were incentives to drive teens from the workforce.
Yes.
I'm not actually sure if that has to do with the Social Security or not, but
we can jump into that.
That makes sense. I do have, and I just want to put this as like a thing to, because you used the phrase a minute ago about, and this was because of this.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the causation hasn't been established yet.
Okay.
Like, to take the example of, say, depression among 18-year-olds, I think part of this might be, I mean, just if, I'm not saying this is the cause, but I can think of other causes that sound just as plausible. Mm-hmm. So like, all right, now you're an adult. Now you have all this responsibility. You're 18. Now you get to pick your career for what you want to do the rest of your life. You get to go into tremendous debt to go to school so you can do that career. Mm-hmm. You get to never afford a house because they cost 7 times what your parents paid for them. You'll never make as much money as your parents did. You'll never have enough for retirement. Like, you come to realize those things at 18, and of course you're super depressed. And so, like, I don't know if, I mean, and that would also explain why these rates are going up. And another corollary fact is that we have more child protection laws, but it could just be the fact that young people today are fucked, right? And they realize that when they're coming into the world and they look around like, oh wait, I'm fucked.
I think young people now are less fucked than they were in the 1880s, though, and yet things are getting worse mentally and emotionally.
The thing that is
we're also just better at establishing mental and emotional fuckery than we were 120 years ago, 140 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think there was the youth suicide epidemic back then.
No, you can again look at pre-industrial cultures, especially look at hunter-gatherers. I mean, that's sort of a different topic, but
I didn't mean to derail too hard, but I mean, I guess I want to just like, every time you're inclined to say, because of this, I just want, what is his evidence that he's got that this is the cause, other than the correlation?
Okay.
All right.
It was a good call out, though.
Yes.
Because, these are all a bunch of correlations, but I have read all of your notes, and I believe that they do point at something.
Well, shall we get into the correlations? Because he kind of goes into a lot of them one by one.
And I realize that we can't do a large-scale blind study on this, right? So I'm not asking for, here's experimental proof.
You can do studies about criminality, or you can run statistics on, how many kids join a gang, OD on drugs, like commit suicide.
Yeah, totally. You can't do controlled experiments on those things.
Yeah. Well,
you can.
I'm saying that there are ways of gathering evidence and facts.
Oh yeah,
around.
100%. I was saying that I wasn't drawing the line at the absurd standard that we need a controlled trial for me to believe this. You can get really good, bet your house on it information just from careful observation of the way things are in different places. Yeah.
Anything else you want to? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say too, because you mentioned the suicidality of people 140 years ago. I mean, part of it might have been means of access. Part of it might have been, again, you had something to do, right?
Right.
Like, so,
I mean, having something to do is actually a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what we're going.
Yeah, but I mean that an 18-year-old today might have plenty to do, but they don't feel like they can ever make an impact, and that's nothing.
Which is not the case back then.
Right, but that has nothing to do about when they were given the opportunity to start working. That has everything to do with the way the world is and the amount of impact you're allowed to have. Like you talked about in the opening analogy of not being able to make an impact on the world. It's like, well, most of us can't. Even on your own local world, unless you live on a farm.
You don't,
and
that has brought up a fair bit.
But this has nothing to do with age. This has to do with the modern world.
Well, I mean, yes and no. The modern world specifically prevents young people.
What's the voting age?
The voting age is 18.
You don't get to vote about whether or not, you get to make better, low skill jobs better or more impactful. That's not something you can vote on.
No, but you can vote on whether kids are allowed to work instead of going to school.
I guess I'm not convinced yet that if someone was allowed to bag groceries at 15, that they would be happier than if they got to bag groceries at 18.
No, of course not. Bagging groceries is one of the worst jobs there is.
Right.
That's why we allow teens to do them, because we prevent them from taking any jobs that are meaningful or important or could develop skills that they could use later in life.
But if that someone's going to be bagging groceries no matter what, right? Until we get robots doing it. So
sure, but why are we? Okay, so
I'm not trying to get derailed. I'm pointing at that, like the fact that you can't make a large impact. That I don't know how much that has to do with age. That has to just do with the age, the time that it is now, right?
So I know what you're saying, and one of the things I kind of didn't like about this book is that it is peppered all throughout with, I don't know if it gets to 100 examples, maybe it's 100, definitely dozens. Every few pages, there's another couple paragraphs just giving examples of young people doing things that are important. I pulled out one of them because it's Bill Gates, and we all know and love Bill Gates, but he started doing meaningful work with computers at the age of 11. And that was one of the nice things about growing up in the late 80s, mid 90s, was that computers were a new thing, which were a lot of young people just jumped into it, and there was no one telling you, no, you can't work on computers in your own garage, your own home. And that was a place where a lot of people could wrest back control of their lives, and he was one of the people that did that, famously so. And so there are some domains where you can make an impact, but the typical domains that adults usually pursue, like helping their community by being their electrician or their plumber or whatever else it is just denied to young people. so that they can't do them. And the example I was going to go to was when I was a sophomore, I think, in high school. One of the smartest fucking kids in my class. Gosh, I don't remember her name now. We weren't like close friends, kind of like peripheral friends, but she was just driven, smart, very conscientious, and she got a job working at Burger King, and she was the best fucking Burger King employee they had. She was amazing, but it was an absolute waste of potential. There is so much more she could have done if she was allowed to become an intern at some place that works with technology, or even in the business world. Like any place would have been lucky to have this person as an entry-level employee, and she wasn't allowed to, and it was a fucking tragedy.
I watched the kids at the library I used to work at. We had a like programming for kids activity, and I watched these two kids like this one kid sitting there like, so can you tell me how I do my marketing? Mm-hmm. She's like, oh, you don't have any followers yet. Here, well, I'm gonna be your first follower. So what you want to do is post on a regular schedule, and like here's how you like. Basically, she's giving this kid like SEO advice. I'm just like, okay, you guys clearly don't need my help.
Mm-hmm. And how old would you guess she was?
I think she was 9 at the time.
Oh, nice.
These were like 2 9-year-olds. The other kid was the one who read the same books as me. Mm. He read the 5th season at Case Against Adolescence because he read all of the children's books and was bored by them. And so it just started like, he like sort of hacked into our open source library system so we could see what books people had checked out, which like actually you're not supposed to be able to do that. But he would just like see what I had checked out and then check it out, and like I was like,
that's fantastic.
The Hogwarts library restricted section.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
the library had an adult, and I think most libraries, they have like an adult section, a children's section, and now they've started having a teens section. And like, what part of my job was keeping adults out of the kids section, and vice versa.
Adults couldn't go to the kids section?
You could if you had a kid.
Like,
or if you were like there, but they were, oh no, like a pedophile might come in.
I guess I was just thinking like I could imagine myself swinging by to grab a Baby Shark book for my 3-year-old niece, right? Like that should be allowed.
It is like, but it was this sort of like, I don't know. There was actually a lot of design work that went around making the area like visible from all sides, so we could look out for perverts, but also so you could monitor the kids.
Yeah, and if one of them starts taking a piss on the bookshelf, you want to be able to stop them before they finish, right?
I think it would probably happen on the adult side. Like the thing that really struck me about that library was that it was full of smart kids and dumb adults. Like I was trying to also test myself, like as I was driving over, because I was like, okay, I totally agree with everything in this, and I feel really like. Actually, like, it was just making me mad reading all this shit. Mm-hmm. I was like, but is this, like, my real opinion? Like, and I like, ran this scenario. I was like, okay, so what if, like, it's a survival situation, like zombie apocalypse, and I'm in the library, and I've got 2 guns, and I was like, okay, do I give the other gun to an adult or a kid? And I just immediately was like, oh, no question. Like, I could think of which specific kids I would, like, be like, okay, you take this gun, like, you guard the kids section, I'll, like, whatever. And I was like, and I can, like, specific adults that I would not want anywhere near a gun.
When you say kid, what age are you talking about?
I'm talking little kids. Like, I mean, like, the first thought was one of our teen volunteers. But they definitely showed much more, like, just capability.
Have you fired a gun?
Huh?
Have you shot a gun?
Yeah.
Like, that there's some kickback.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like a survival scenario.
Yeah, me too. But I'm not sure if I would trust a 9-year-old's, forearm strength to handle the recoil of a gun and not drop it or freak out at it. Right?
I mean, like,
I think I'd hand it to
logistically, whatever. What I'm trying to get at is,
if you've grown up in a rural area, you fired guns at 9.
Fair enough, and I didn't mean.
I mean, that's sort of besides the point. Like,
I hit on the stupid point. Sorry. Yeah, I see what you're saying for the conscientiousness and.
How old is Ellie in the first Last of Us game? I think she's 12, right?
12-ish, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, it's a good example of fiction where there's no real childhood.
Right.
Right? Because there's no time for it. Mm-hmm. That's one thing I really liked about Last of Us, too, because it'd been some years after, probably 10 years after the zombie apocalypse, right? 10 or 13 years?
No, The Last of Us 1 started 30 years after the apocalypse.
30?
I believe so.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
I thought I could have sworn it was like 15. Anyway, so yeah, this. I mean, so you have
Maybe it was. I mean, it was definitely more than a decade.
Okay.
I thought it was like 2 or 3 decades.
In that case, yeah. I mean, you've got generations of people that didn't have childhoods, right? So
they still had childhoods. They didn't have adolescence.
they had. I mean, they had some childhood, but their childhood training included here's the end of a gun, or here's the end of the gun that bullets come out of, and
They included essential skills for
Right.
life.
Yeah. Anyway, the one thing I was going to mention too was about, and I guess I don't want to harp on this the entire episode, but about the meaning aspect of what you get when you magically turn 18 or something. Like I still think much of that lack of meaning comes from your lack of ability to influence the world at a meaningful scale because of the way the world is, not because of how old you are.
I think you're maybe thinking of meaning differently than they are talking about it in this. Like, it's not like
It's not an influence.
you get to go
world.
change the world. It's like more just the
Be
feeling of
valuable to
control
the
over
people
your
you love.
life,
Or even your own life.
like the choice to do it or not.
I also
Like, it's more meaningful to be able to choose what you are going to eat for breakfast tomorrow than to have someone slop something down in front of you and say, "This is your food."
Yeah. I definitely agree that there are ways to treat children, including young adults, with more autonomy than we do now. And I mean, this is a trick you can do with toddlers. You let them pick, do you want peas or carrots with dinner?
Right.
And the fact that you give them a choice gives them authorship, and they still have to eat the vegetable, right? So like you're tricking them into doing one of the smart things. Which arm do you want your COVID vaccine in, left or right? Like they don't get a choice of not getting it, which I think is a good idea.
Well, they technically do.
Depriving
They
people
could
of
have not shown
choices like straight up causes depression, though. Like you can reliably create like really miserable environments for people by restricting their choices, putting curfews on people, like,
Right. Yeah. I'm just saying that as far as
making them feel helpless.
Yeah. So you can give small children
It's a good way of putting it. We're enforcing helplessness.
Yeah, no, it's like there's
many
this
years.
concept of learned helplessness, and I see adults with it, but like it is literally like you can teach a behavior of helplessness. They did like the study that actually coined the term, I think, was they took dogs and they had them in this maze or something like that, and there was an area where you would get a shock. I might be like...
They had jumped through a window, basically, once, like, the floor would electrocute.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
But,
if they
like,
close the window, then they just lay there and get
if you
shot.
stick dogs in there and then, like, you leave the box open, and, yeah, they will, like, run away as soon as they start getting shocked. But, like, if you close the door and they have no choice about whether or not they're getting shocked, if later, like, if they've learned that behavior, like, okay, this sound happens, and then I get a shock, and there's nothing I can do about it. When they've learned there's nothing I can do about it, which doesn't take very long, you can open the door and the dog won't leave the box, even if it's getting shocked.
Yeah, because it's already learned. It's going to get shocked.
Yeah.
What's the point of doing anything?
That was, I think, the experiment that taught me when I was a teenager and first learned about it. And then I came across the Peter Singer quote that put it so succinctly that either animals aren't related to, like, enough to us cognitively to where these experiments are valuable to learn anything about people at all, or they are, in which case it's monstrously unforgivable to do these experiments on them, right?
Right.
Like, what good is it to know that you can torture a dog till it's sad forever, right? That doesn't help us learn anything, unless it is transferable to people, in which case you're a fucking monster.
I think it's kind of also, to get back to the point, kind of monstrous that we are spending a good 5+ years teaching all humans helplessness.
Maybe this guy observes childhood, and it's interesting because the book was published in 2008, which is the year I turned 18, give or take a year. I'm bad at remembering what age I am.
Me too.
But in any case, so like my childhood is not at all like he's describing. I had a job at 15. I had a job at 16, and after
Was it a shit job?
Yeah, but for the
Could
most
your
part,
parents take away any of your property if they wanted to? Could they take away your phone or your right to drive a car?
I wasn't allowed to have a phone or video games.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of things that were taken away from me because you legally can't own property. Like, your parents can take away anything as a means of controlling you, and oftentimes they do.
Yeah, I mean, so part of me wonders if, like, this, and we'll get to the, like, what proposed solutions this guy has, but, like, my parents were also pretty chill about most stuff. Like,
so you had pretty good parents.
I had pretty good parents. I mean, they, the one thing that, like, we didn't have was, like, a large set of books at home or something. Like, they weren't very academic, but, like, other than that, we had all the freedoms in the world. Like, I don't think I even had a phone until I was 15 or 16, and it was a hand-me-down because my mom got a new phone. Actually, I was the last kid of us, I think, to get a phone. But I mean, I grew up at the age where at 14 I could go to my mom and be like, all right, I'm gonna go out, and she's like, all right, be home by dinner. And like, granted, that's impacting on my freedom or whatever, but it also kind of makes sense if you ever had a child or a pet that you care about, that like you want to know where it is when it gets dark out. You know, like I don't think that's an unreasonable restriction to put on someone's freedom. And it wasn't even be home by dinner necessarily. It was at least call me and let me know if you'll make it to dinner, so I know how much food to prepare. Which is, again, I don't want to nitpick, but like, that's a restriction on freedom. You're asking me to do something, but like, that's just life. You know, if you're gonna miss work, you're allowed to miss work by an hour if you tell your boss, hey, I'm going to be an hour late, you know, unless your boss sucks, like Charlie's. But, you know, my boss, they don't care. Sometime this week, I'm going to take an hour off for a doctor appointment, and they don't, you know. Like,
oh my God, they treat you like an adult.
Right. But that's the thing. Well, I mean, I was also treated this way as a child. So like
I was not. I despised my father.
So I think that's a main difference, is that like, I wonder at what point, like, part of this is societal / legal, and what part of it is just like at home.
Yes.
You know, like my parents.
Well, I mean, your parents were pretty good, but the thing is, if you don't have good parents, you don't pick your parents. If you don't have good parents, you're fucked. Whereas one of the things he advocates is, if you don't have your good parents, you should be able to leave. If you can demonstrate that you're capable of living your own life, you should be able to be like, bye, and go and have your own life.
This reminds me of like foster home situations where if kids get older, they're less likely to be adopted, to the point where when you're in your teens, like, those kids don't want to be adopted. They want to get jobs, and like, they've already sort of, in a lot of the cases, been in a situation of like taking care of younger kids.
Yeah.
And having to take care of themselves in a lot of ways, but there's still this like, until you're 18, you have to be somebody's property.
That's an interesting thing he brings up later on in the book too, where young mothers are held legally liable for their children.
Oh yeah, at like 14.
Yeah,
so, but
they are not given the legal ability to do any of these things, so they're put in this impossible situation.
Yeah, that's fucked up.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Charlie moved out of the house at 15. She got her own job. She got her own apartment. And once you are in a place, like, okay, my parents have gotten better, I think. Maybe it's just due mellowing with age, or maybe it's because of how badly me and my sister rebelled against all this control. But
well, and now they can't tell you what to do. This is probably another big part of it.
Yes, but no, I mean, I'm talking about now my younger brothers. My brother Chris, he has never moved out of my parents' house. He's 30, 31 at this point, and they get along well, and he pays rent. They have extra room. It's like a roommate situation where, you know, you can live that way with your parents if you have a good relationship with them. But there's always the option of like, if things go to shit, all right, I'm moving out, you know? There's that difference in autonomy over your own life makes a huge difference, as opposed to, well, you're imprisoned in this house. You have to sleep here. You have to go to school. You have no other choices of what you can do with your life. You have to report
on where you're going and what time you're coming back. And
if you do anything we don't like, we'll take away everything that matters to you.
Yeah, and in my case, my parents were the only way I could get transportation somewhere. So like,
we can take away your ability to see other people in your life that matter to you for indefinite amounts of time.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess that we'll keep moving through the book, but like I said, there seems to be a big difference between shit parenting and shit societal expectations of young people.
But in previous societies, if the parenting was bad, the kids could go and do other things,
or they couldn't, and they just their legal recourse was, you sit home and get your ass whooped.
Well, yeah, in the 9-year-old example, she couldn't do much of anything. But you know, talking about once adolescence hits.
I mean, I know somebody who, when 15, left home and it basically went super terribly. You know, like the ability to leave home doesn't, like, I mean, it gives you an out, right? It gives you autonomy.
It doesn't mean your life's going to be great.
It might mean that it's way worse than if you had just cut your fucking hair like your dad told you to.
Yeah.
You know, and that was the reason you wanted to move out.
Maybe you can go back and say, okay, my hair's cut now.
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
you at least have that option. When you see the real world, you're like, oh, okay, this wasn't so bad. Let's go back.
I think the freedom to make that choice is important too. They made that point in the book about how it's the things like that protect people from themselves, I think, are the most harmful part of this, because like teenagers do have that like risk seeking or risk tolerance because that is the time of your life when you are supposed to be going and trying things and making mistakes, and like you learn
and
how
you can
to
absorb the consequences of mistakes much easier when you're younger, whether they're physical or whatever.
Well, I mean, like, it's sort of similar to our last episode, and then sort of even like similar to the banned goods store again. The whole like giving people the choice of what they do to themselves,
Right.
and it shouldn't be able to just outright ban something because somebody might hurt themselves with it. That's like
People are allowed.
that's literally infantilization.
Yeah, people should be allowed to make mistakes. People should be allowed to be wrong. I know I say that a lot, and in large part it's because I'm against censorship, and the argument for censorship is always these people are wrong, and they shouldn't be allowed to be wrong in public where they can convince other people to be wrong, but you should have the right to be wrong about things, and that's okay. Maybe I'm wrong about something, but if somebody tries to shut me up about it, that's going to be a problem. There were people who were wrong about whether gays should have rights or not, and the fact that they were allowed to talk about how gays should be rights is what allowed us to see that actually they weren't wrong, it was everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, not to get on the free speech thing, but there are cases where, like, no, there's something that there can be true information that the more widely known it is, the worse off everyone is, or something. That's like the hardest steel man case. Yeah, like an info hazard, or if it just turned out to be really easy, and it's getting easy, you can order genetic sequences to for your own home biolabs.
You sure can.
And so in 3 years you'll be able to make your own COVID 20. What year is it? 2021 right now?
It is.
You can make your COVID 24.
How old am I? What year
and
is it?
it has a 50% mortality rate. And like, so we shouldn't publish that recipe online, and it's a true thing. But that's a whole other thing.
Was COVID-19 named that because it was created in 2019?
It was discovered in 2019.
Oh.
So all the dipshits were like, "Oh no, they found 18 of these. The 19th one isn't that big of a deal." That's just because they heard that on the news and they listened to the wrong news. But I guess this does come down to kind of what we talked about last week about what kinds of mistakes people should be allowed to make. Because I had a hard time engaging with that properly last week because. Charlie's, so much of the case was coming from Charlie, who was resting on her personal life experience. And for me to argue it with her would be like, I disagree with your life experience. And so I couldn't be like, well, sure, it worked for you, but I think you might be the exception rather than the rule. Or, a
lot of these things, I mean, especially on the younger side of things, are for people who are the exception rather than the rule. But also, I think those people are very important. I know just recently we were talking in the Mind Killer podcast about how California is getting rid of all their gifted programs for math. I know. Because
they canceled the gifted program I was in as a kid because of, I think...
equality or equity issues. Yeah, because the people who are not as good as math are not being served equally or something. But that's the whole point. We want people who are exceptional in these things to have access to that. They're the ones that are going to be. Yeah, they're the ones that are going to be driving society, and they really need that so school is less torturous and they can make something of themselves. And this is the same kind of thing where, like, yeah, the exceptions do matter. And so if you're crippling all the exceptional people because some people are not exceptional, that's not acceptable.
Yeah,
it's the same reason, like, oh no, we can't make R-rated movies because what if a kid sees it somewhere? I'm like, fuck you, fuck protecting the kids. I like my R-rated action movies.
I think some kids can also watch R-rated movies.
Yes, they can.
Like,
I've heard actually kids are pretty good about.
I've met plenty of kids who have like the ability to watch gore and like sex scenes and have like actual informed opinions about them and not be traumatized by it.
And if they can't, they do the thing where like they cover their eyes or look away. Like there is a common protective response.
I do that now
if you're not mature enough. Yeah,
I was watching a movie a couple nights ago where this crazy woman is it's the middle of the night and she's cutting like celery and onions and stuff, and I'm like, oh, she's gonna chop her fingers off because there's like a ghost in the house. So I'm literally just I'm waiting for it to happen, not looking at the screen, got my arm up, and then I'm looking at Rachel and I watch her wince. I'm like, yeah, I knew that was coming. I told you, and it was gross. And then I watch up and she's like cutting them into pieces too, her cut off fingers because ghost madness, right?
Okay.
But like I don't like I'm squeamish about stuff. Yeah. And I watched a lot of R-rated movies as a kid. Some probably traumatized me, some probably didn't. I don't know if I was terrified of spiders before the 5th time I saw the movie Arachnophobia, but probably didn't help.
The one that sticks out most in my mind, when I was a little kid, I saw someone getting garroted in a public bathroom. And, like, That's
Jesus Christ.
I mean, not in real life, in a movie.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, I would have been capped as a witness.
Was it the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie?
No, I don't remember what movie it was. It was just some random gangster flick.
Gotcha.
And that, like, kind of fucked me up. It came out of nowhere. But, like, you know, then I watched the Freddy Krueger movies, and those were so cartoonish. Like, whatever. It wasn't a big deal compared to, like, seeing an example of actual violence where there wasn't even any blood involved, but the dude was struggling for his life. I was like, oh, fuck.
I think one of the creepiest, this is, sorry, some side topic, Labyrinth, the movie The Labyrinth?
Yeah.
You know that it's like a bloodless scene, but that's the only thing I've seen in a movie that ever actually disturbed me to this level. There's a scene where a character smashes a person's face in with a bottle.
Huh.
Like, he takes a bottle and he's repeatedly just smashing him in the face with it, and the special effect, like, it looks like real violence in a way that movies often don't.
I don't remember that scene.
Yeah, I remember, and, you know, I saw that when I was in my 20s, and I found that disturbing.
Yeah.
But, sure, I don't know. I think I'm only saying that because I have a hard time. I was, like, going through my childhood memories and being like, actually, I was, like... I was difficult to traumatize in some ways. I had, like, farm animals, and I got to, like, see some of my, like, pet ducks get killed by a fox and stuff in real life. So it was like movie violence didn't even...
Right. You saw an actual...
Yeah.
Shall we move on?
What's that?
Oh, I was just going to say, should we move on to some of the ways young people get fucked?
I mean, I feel like let's frame it a little differently and like let's look at the case for that some people get fucked.
Okay.
And I mean, you're loading your
well, of course I want to win.
There's a word for this. We'll ask our lawyers where you're priming the jury or something, right?
Poisoning the well, maybe?
Yeah, poisoning the well is the word I was looking for, but yeah, there's a jury word for it too.
I don't know if that's
trying to think of it. I know what you mean.
Leading the witness, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yes.
So speaking of legal stuff,
all right.
One of the problems is the juvenile legal system, which has been completely divorced from the actual legal system. He points out that the Fifth Amendment of our Constitution guarantees that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, property without due process of the law. And the Sixth Amendment guarantees the accused shall enjoy a right to speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. But apparently, if you are under 18, you do not count as a person anymore. Because as of the 1960s, in many states, less than 5% of juvenile offenders were represented by counsel at all. They didn't have juries at their trials, and most hearings were held in secret.
That part's weird. I was going to ask about trying children as adults. I do think that it makes sense. I'm curious what the reasoning is behind not having jurors and stuff like that for children criminality. But I saw a video on Reddit. I think it was r/convenient-cop. And there's a cop at a gas station, and as it happens, he was there while across the gas station, some kid was doing his gang initiation thing and shooting into a gas station parking lot, killing some 79-year-old war veteran, and the kid was a kid. I probably post-puberty because I think he was a young teen.
He could reach the pedals.
Okay. You could probably reach the pedals. I don't know if he's tried it as an adult or not, but is this kind of arguing that, like, no, if you've if you're...
You should face consequences if you fuck up.
Well, yes. So it seems to be kind of...
The argument is that if you break a law, unless you are literally incompetent to the point of, like, an 8-year-old is where they don't know what you're doing, you face consequences like any other citizen does. So you get the right to a trial by jury, you get the right to a lawyer, and you're treated like a regular person.
I think you should have juries and lawyers and all that for whatever case. And he does point out
that one of the things you can do to be treated as an adult is to commit a crime serious enough that people have to drop the farce that you aren't an adult. So yeah, oftentimes gang initiations include things like reckless behavior, usually not literal required murder, but reckless behavior that can lead to killing someone. Because if you do kill someone, all of a sudden the system's like, okay, we're done fucking around pretending you're a child. You're facing actual consequences for this. But for the most part, they just take away people's right to have a trial because it'd be inconvenient to treat them like a real person and just be like, oh no, you're going to juvie, where we decide your fate for you because you did shoplifting.
Parents face the consequences.
And oftentimes parents face consequences.
And that provides another incentive to control kids more.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there's a couple things to unpack there. I do disagree with the fact that children, for the legal definition, aren't given juries and lawyers. So I'm not going to argue that point. But I do think that there's something to the fact that I don't, my recollection of my childhood's not great. I don't think at 13 I knew what a consequence 10 years down the road could possibly look like.
Right.
Because my memory of the previous 10 years was basically non-existent, right? So, like, I couldn't imagine 10 years into the future. What would it be like to spend 15 years in prison? I literally couldn't imagine it, right? Okay. I'm assuming. I can't ask my 13-year-old self.
If you were at the level of maturity where you actually cannot be held legally responsible because you just haven't developed that far, you won't be.
Well, but...
Like, that's the thing. You treat children like children. You treat people who aren't children like not children.
So, I mean, I wanted to save this for some point, and I don't want to get derailed, but we'll put a pin in it of, like, how the hell do you measure that? But let's move past that for a sec. Because, I mean, I do think that at some point, like, I guess when I think of parents, I don't think of them as, like, jail wardens or, owners of property. I think of, ideally, huh?
You had pretty good parents.
Right. So I had good parents, but I think that in an ideal, the way that this should work is that parents should be like the stewards of their kids. And in a way, in a not insignificant way, you are responsible for how they turn out. There's a lot of shakeup about basically they're going to turn out how they're going to turn out, whether or not you fuck up or not, and you have to really fuck up for them to be fucked up from your whatever.
Yeah. If you don't traumatize your kids, like
too much, yeah.
Well, I mean,
if you don't traumatize them, then they I think have pretty successfully shown that like a large part of the way kids turn out is just genetic.
Yeah,
and so the thing is,
parenting doesn't matter that much.
If you did fuck up your children, even in pre-industrial societies, again using the term not technically correctly, but whatever, even if you weren't held accountable for their actions, and the children would be the one who was sent to the mines and punishment or whatever, and by children again I mean someone who is physically an adult and knows how to accept consequences, it's not like people don't know that your child is the one that fucked up, and you are held in some way reputationally responsible, which is where the whole "you have brought dishonor on the family name" comes from. Like, yeah, it is a mark against the family name if the child goes and does something like that, because maybe the parents fucked something up really bad.
And they probably could have done better if your 12-year-old is shooting people. Yes. Not in every case, but in probably many of them.
My sister used to work at a preschool or elementary school in Atlantic City, and there were kids bringing knives. Like,
yeah.
I didn't quote that the statistic, but yeah, he also quoted how many adolescents bring weapons to school now.
Yeah, and that they like busted for drugs and like just I don't know that.
Wait, you said preschool? They're busted for drugs?
Not elementary school.
What kind of drugs?
Oh, elementary school.
So at that, I will say it's bad parenting.
Shit.
I think that's bad parenting. The parents should be held accountable. Because the kid, as we've talked about, can't get a job with and earn income to buy their own drugs from the drug dealer down the street. They're finding them at their parents' house. You lock that shit up. You put it on top of the fridge where the 9-year-old can't get to it.
He makes a similar point about gangs, how gangs actually serve a need and give teens a lot of agency, because then you can make your own money, you can support yourself.
Oh yeah, and I find that quote.
Yeah, and they even have like strict organizations with ranks that you can increase your standing in. Like, gangs are pretty decent aside from the whole, breaking laws and killing people thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about the sorry, I just before I forget, the kids will turn out how they're going to turn out unless you radically fuck up. That seems to be the case, and yet we're all aghast at the fact that they're getting rid of advanced standing programs for math and stuff. But in the next breath, we're saying kids are going to turn out how they're going to turn out, no matter, unless you traumatize them.
Like, I personally am making the argument here that all of society is traumatizing almost all of our kids, and it is having massive impacts for decades.
I'm upset at them taking away, like, the opportunity for a kid to advance themselves early. Like, there were so many savant, like, level, really smart kids at my library. There was a kid who built a retro Pi from a Raspberry Pi, and then made a cardboard console to house it in, and uploaded a bunch of video games to it as just like a public service to the library. Nice. So we had like a little arcade thing, and I was just like, this kid should be in the workforce.
Yeah.
And
the book is just peppered with examples like that.
This kid was this like sort of like nerdy, shy kid that I could just see full of adult anxiety all the time. It kind of pissed me off, because this kid was clearly like adult level maturity.
Yeah.
And was being treated like a baby. And I could like, I would watch him pace and like pull his hair. And I actually have trichotillomania, and I was like, I remembered that I also developed it around that age, which trichotillomania is a type of OCD where you compulsively pull out your hair. And I was like, I'm watching this kid like develop trichotillomania from these circumstances. He's being held back. You know, he's not being recognized. He's bored. But the thing about gangs, sorry, getting back to that, I just wanted to say that I really liked this one quote that you pulled out. Gang activity is not childlike, it's most definitely adult. Gangs emulate small governments and armies.
Yeah.
Which,
gives kids I'm using the word kids in the not pejorative sense, but we need it's too many syllables to say
young people constantly.
Well, or young
Teens?
young people of adult physical.
Can we just say teens?
Age. Sure. Yeah, teens works.
It's got one syllable.
Yeah. But I mean, then someone will quibble about 18 and 19, but yeah, we'll say teens. Yeah, I mean, it definitely gives teens a sense of authorship. You know, you have to do what your boss tells you, lest you get possibly killed. But, there's not a lot of freedom when your boss can kill you. But there's some.
I'm not pro-gang, to be clear.
No, I hope none of us are.
I don't think
Pointing
the
at them
author
as, like, a bad outcome of this system, though, that, like, oppresses kids.
Yeah, I can see that point.
I started... This is, like, sort of related, so I'm saying it. I started, looking at jobs in the medical field that are not strictly clinical research. For example, I was looking at a medical assistant position, and I was looking at all the requirements, and I was like, I have all these requirements. And then they said, must have spent 2 years in the field. And I looked at all the other jobs that I was looking at, had that requirement of needs 2 years experience doing this thing. And I was like, how does anybody get hired if you need 2 years experience? Like, I can't... this is this thing that you run into with teens and college kids too, where like, unless you work like an unpaid internship somewhere to get experience, you like...
And people used to get experience just by going out and working in the thing they were actually interested in.
I could like I'm self-taught in all the fields that I went into, and I've done a bunch of different jobs. It's like, let me learn on my feet, you know?
Yeah.
This is the eternal paradox of basically every young person's attempt to get into any real employment.
Well, fortunately,
they often don't even count internships, because that was something that my wife found when she graduated. She doesn't like to brag about it, but I will. She got an Ivy League master's degree, and was told over and over, no, you need years of experience. Well, like, I interned for 3 of those years. Yeah, internships don't count.
It's like, how the hell does anybody get into the field then?
Right. Yeah. It's just a kind of a huge fuck you. That said, in your particular case, and everyone listening, apply to those jobs anyway.
Yeah.
They're often put together by the HR person who has no idea what the job is. And if somebody looks at your actual experience, then they're like, oh, they actually know what they're doing. I don't care if they haven't done this for 2 years that they got paid for it or something, right?
I'm actually curious to see if I could get this statistician job, where it was like, okay, the requirements again were like, you need to have these licenses, and I was like, okay, I could get those. And then like, you need to know R or Strata or like a statistical programming language, and I was like, I could learn that. I'm just really curious to see if like I have all these other requirements. I have like really related experience in clinical research. It's like, if you're willing to take me on and let me just self-learn this, or even like if you have an educational opportunity, I don't know, this is the kind of thing that I like.
What email can people reach you at?
jlyndickey@gmail.com.
Okay, we will put it in the show notes as
Today
well.
I learned your middle name.
Lynne. My parents had to do that.
And I'll just put out there for everyone looking for jobs. If it says, 2 years experience, just apply. It's at least worth the effort to apply. If it says 5 to 10 or 7 plus or something, probably don't waste your 45 minutes applying. But nowhere says we'll take anybody with no experience. So just apply to jobs.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about jobs, because the next section is about labor and child labor laws.
And we're going to talk about crime and stuff too.
Oh yeah, did you have a thought you wanted to finish on that before we move on to labor?
This is more for crime. But are we done with crime, or are we?
Go ahead and hit the crime thing before we abandon that particular boat.
So I guess it does want us. I need to know what criterion you use to gauge maturity, competency.
The same criteria you would use for every other human, including what we now call adults. Because like some people aren't competent even when they're in the age of majority. And usually we have some exceptions for the mentally handicapped or something, but, well, not usually, almost always. But it would be the same sort of thing where you are judged based on your actual capabilities as opposed to an arbitrary number cutoff.
How do you judge someone's actual capabilities when they're at the cusp of gaining those capabilities?
We can get into that later on, but the short answer is when you can score better than 50% of adults, you are considered competent.
And like, I think that was specifically a Raven's matrices, right? Or some other IQ test.
It was, there were a number of competency tests that, were
so you can do, basic cognitive tests. Just to determine whether, like, does this person have problem-solving skills?
All right, I will hold my reservations for that for the most part, other than to throw out, because I can't control myself. I feel like an IQ test, you can easily bomb on purpose.
Yes.
And so you could make yourself seem incompetent.
Okay.
And if you're a kid who somehow has the
That's
cognitive
a really
capacity,
strange thing for someone to do, but okay.
Well, if you knew you were facing 10 years in prison otherwise, I would be very incentivized to
people
fail.
plead insanity all the time, I mean.
Right, but apparently I was asking a lawyer, not as often as one might think, and
probably because the lawyers tell them, no, this will never fly.
Right. But if you're routinely representing 14-year-olds, you might say, look, they're going to give you a test, take a long time and answer some questions wrong, right? Or that would just float around online, Yeah,
the test wouldn't be done, like, after you've committed the crime. This is something people are going to be doing when they want rights.
Oh, so, like, you don't get to go get a job until you pass this test.
Yes.
And then once you pass that test, you can't pretend, I'm a child.
Right.
Okay. That gets around some of the problems for me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. We'll jump into the next topic here.
Okay, well, since we were talking about labor, traditionally when people wanted to do things, they just went and did them, and oftentimes they would help their parents in whatever their parents are doing, which is how they slowly got integrated into adult society.
Yeah, or go apprentice.
And often apprentice, yeah.
I'm pretty annoyed that apprenticeship is not really some fields. I'm thinking of plumbers. I know specifically apprentice people. Mm-hmm. And I'm annoyed that more fields don't have an apprenticeship option.
I honestly can't think of any field that apprenticeship couldn't work. Like, I'm an accountant, and that could easily work in accounting. Like, is there any field where you can't apprentice?
I'm trying to think of one. I mean, like...
Even, like, really high-end research, you can still use an apprentice to help you around the lab, and they start picking up skills.
I was thinking that. I mean, most people are actually just sort of self-taught for their job anyway.
Yes.
That, like, you can't...
Almost no one uses anything they learned in college or high school on the
there's
job.
things that you actually just can't teach, too. Like, you need the experience, but you need the experience by trying to do the thing, fucking up, and then learning from that.
I guess this is going to the school thing, which we will get to later.
I was going to say, like, biochem lab, where you're working with really dangerous stuff.
Right.
I don't want a 15-year-old interning with me. I want somebody who's been doing this for 10 years interning with me.
No, but you don't want someone who's been working with it for 10 years, because they won't intern with you. They already know everything, and they want a higher level job.
Let me rephrase that then. Well, this is the highest level job, right? If I'm working on...
You don't get the highest level job.
You said, is there any job you can internship for? And my first thought was, like, nuclear lab physicist.
You could totally be an intern in there.
I wouldn't want teens bumbling around when I'm building a nuclear bomb.
So one of the actual examples he gives where I complain slightly about these being everywhere, the 2 to 3 paragraph things, is I think what is now known as the nuclear Boy Scout, but the kid who at 13 started building his own small nuclear reactor, and it took him 2 years to finish it. So this guy had, some major, what I would consider adult ability to commit to a project. But yeah, 2 years later, he had a very small working nuclear reactor in his garage, and it was even safe.
Michio Kaku claims to have built a particle accelerator in his garage as a kid.
I remember hearing about that.
Maybe they were very large particles. I'm accelerating this BB gun ball.
I don't doubt that some kid in the world could do that. I don't know if... I have, like, squinty eyes at Michio Kaku.
Yeah. I've specifically heard that particle... Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
They wouldn't cost $1 billion. They wouldn't cost tens of billions of dollars to make if a 15-year-old could make one.
Yeah.
That said, maybe
like a precursor to a particle accelerator.
The internship business makes a ton of sense. I mean, you did mention way earlier on about, like, plumbing, electrician, and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't want a 15-year-old wiring electricity to my house.
They don't do it on their own.
I wouldn't mind if they were watching a professional do it.
Yeah, like passing the wire cutters
Yeah.
and
Hand me a
the
screwdriver.
person saying like,
Yeah.
okay, this blue one is attached here, and like, so when you do this yourself, you got to remember to strip this one this way, like.
There's another example given in the book about someone who started working, I believe this was in India, but started working in the medical field really early, and by the age 15 was doing his first surgery. I think it was a cesarean section under the supervision of an actual, very experienced surgeon watching them. But yeah, they were holding the knife and doing the surgery on their own. And you can start doing that like at fucking 15.
Did the patient know that a 15-year-old who had never done this before was doing the surgery?
It didn't say.
There's actually, this is going back into the school topic, but there was a discussion on Slate Story Codex when they were talking about how to train a prodigy. It was, there was this dude and his wife were, I think, both mathematicians or something, and they wanted to see if they could train their kids to be, if you could teach someone to be a child prodigy, so they trained their kids at chess from like a really young age, and I think they had 3 daughters, or I forget if it was 2 or 3.
3 daughters.
Yeah, and I think all of them like achieved like master level chess skills at a very young age. And then so people were talking about sort of the intersection in the rationalist community of unschooling.
Yeah.
And this sort of thing about like gatekeeping jobs. And I remember people were they're like, are there things you couldn't teach a kid to do? Like if you're unschooling your kid and you want to train your kid to be like the world's best surgeon at a very young age, like how would you be able to teach your kid surgery? And somebody's like, well, I don't know, you could go to the butcher shop and get like
I mean, the way you would teach anyone in college surgery,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
But it was just people trying to come up with, I just was remembering like what's something that you couldn't like teach a kid from home, or like that the kid could not learn by doing, and the limitations were mainly like, I mean, like you probably can't take your kid to the Large Hadron Collider,
Yeah.
and like let them go poke around in it, but aside from that, I mean, like you could teach a kid to do anything an adult can do.
So speaking of job gatekeeping, up until the late 1880s, there were basically no child labor laws. In 1879, only 7 states had any child labor laws in place, and all were being ignored or circumvented to some extent. The major change happened after the Great Depression, when jobs were suddenly very scarce, and they started actually enforcing and passing more child restriction laws in order to keep the adults with the jobs with the adults.
Yeah, they like wanted kids out of the workforce for like economics reasons.
It was interesting. Up until 1935, the Supreme Court would strike down child labor laws on constitutional grounds because back then, I guess, people who weren't 18 were still considered persons with constitutional rights. The first law that got through on a federal level was the Walsh-Healy Public Contracts Act, which prevented the federal government from employing females under 18 or males under 16.
Yeah, what the fuck is with the age gap there?
Well, everyone knows that women achieve mental fitness at later than men. I'm sure was the thinking 100 years ago. Yeah.
A lot of child labor legislation was also propelled by big businesses because the big upper class industrialists didn't depend on cheap labor. And
I was gonna say, because McDonald's needs like fry flippers.
Yeah, they could drive out marginal manufacturers by saying you cannot afford to hire people anymore. So now we are the only employers left in town. The major exception is that on family-owned farms, young people can still work without any restriction, and it turns out more than 100,000 young Americans do so every year without suffering any ill effects. So,
And farms, like, nowadays, I mean, even back then, they were technically complex, but, like, you've got, like, grain threshers that you could lose an arm in, that, like, big combines, like, it's, like, dangerous, hard labor with, like, a lot of it being automated and stuff now, too, and kids are totally staying, using the school exception and working on the farm.
You handle a lot of heavy machinery. I know, were you there? Yes, I think you were there when we were talking with Charlie about her youth, because she said by the age of 14 she was driving just fine because, she grew up in an agricultural environment, and she'd been doing the thing you were talking about, sitting on her dad's lap and steering, and then eventually handling more and more machinery because that's just a thing you do when you grow up on the farm.
Yeah.
I learned to drive a tractor before a car.
Yeah. I'm
curious, it seems like we can't have it both ways, where I suspect I'll have very little contention with the labor stuff. We'll see. I'm sure I can think of some when they come up, but like no ill effects working on the family farm or whatever, except for if you don't go out and plow the fields till sundown, you can't watch TV tonight. So you still have like that coercion level of dick ass parenting where they're making you do stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't like how he can just say, oh yeah, parents who force their kids to do stuff are the worst, unless they're forcing them to farm. Like,
you're generally not forcing them to farm as slave labor. They're helping out on the farm, and
they're helping out in exchange for having access to their Game Boy that night, right?
Yeah, I worked as a kid. I said I got a job at 14, but like even before that, my parents both ran their own businesses, and I worked with them when I got the opportunity or when they needed the help.
I worked with my dad because he had his own business as well, and like he would pay me not a lot because my labor wasn't worth very much, but enough that I bought my own Nintendo when that came out, and it was. If I didn't want to work, I didn't have to. Like, he didn't say, you have to come work with me or you can't do chores.
Yeah, see, or
you can't watch TV.
Yeah, see,
I want to do chores.
I was just thinking that, I could imagine on a family farm where it's like, no, actually, I depend on your labor and I need you out here. Sorry, come home from school, save your homework for later.
Well, you might say that to your child, but like, then you tell them, I depend on your labor, I need you out here. And it's not like you're forcing them into slave labor. It's like, I'm helping my family. I am needed. Like, this is important.
A lot of kids actually want to.
You want to be important and help your family.
I was reading some article about, or maybe it was a podcast, but it was about like why specifically Mexican kids are so well adjusted. Mm-hmm. And I realized they were talking about Mexican kids from Mexico, where the tradition, I guess, or the culture is that like you start letting kids like help out around the house as soon as they start to like show that they want to help, and kids like reliably will mimic their parents, like so somebody was like, how come like Mexican kids can like balance a checkbook and hold down a job or like do all of the house chores, take care of their younger siblings, and American kids can't like be responsible for a goldfish? And it's like the answer was, you have to let the kid be bad at a thing for a while. Like, there's a kid that was cooking dinner for his younger siblings at, like, age, like, 6, and, like, using knives and gas stove, and, like, it's like he learned how to do it because he started helping when he was 3.
Yeah, there's
he
a
wanted
quote
to.
From Adventure Time, the sucking at something is the first step to being kind of good at something.
Yeah, that's the thing that, like, is kind of driving me nuts about this, the freedom to make mistakes or whatever, or, like, to, Stephen, you said earlier, like, parents should be their children's stewards, and I totally agree with that. I think, like, obviously I'm pro radical unschooling, with the idea that, like, kids will educate themselves.
Unless they're stopped from doing so.
Yeah.
I think I don't remember where I saw this link, but recently they dropped off a crate an international nonprofit organization dropped off a crate of, I believe it was iPads, maybe not specifically Apple branded, but an iPad type product outside a village in someplace in rural Africa. It was
Ghana. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was a place where they couldn't really get the infrastructure to build schools, and that they didn't have internet out there or anything, but they just dropped off these pads.
Schools wouldn't have worked. Like, these were kids that also worked on farms, and like, they had to walk everywhere. So it was like, just logistically, there was no way to organize public school. And this was, sorry, I'm sort of taking over your story. I just think this is fucking cool.
It's amazing.
They found out you can just give kids iPads, and they will teach themselves how to program.
Like,
I remember
literally
they gave them
just a box of iPads without instructions, and almost immediately they found out how to turn it on. Yeah, and then they more and more played with it. They taught themselves literacy using this stuff, and like, really interestingly, it was, I think, less than 9 months that some of the smarter kids had actually hacked into the system and started
started learning programming.
Started routing around the restrictions they had put in on that pad. It was great, and like, the results of the study were like, we might be able to educate mass areas of the world just by dropping off a crate of iPads with learning material on them, because kids like to learn. They do it on their own.
They want to.
Yeah.
Except, I don't know, maybe some don't, but the thing is that you're not going to force that kid to learn if they don't want to.
Exactly! You let that kid go out and plow the fields if that's what he wants to do.
This is too unrelated. Never mind.
Okay. I guess, that's putting together the labor with the schooling thing, but they are closely related, because a lot of the reason people's, yeah, sure, let's call them people, are disallowed from working is because they're supposed to be in school all the time. And that is relatively new. The first mandatory schooling law was in 1852, and it required people between 8 and 14 to attend school at least 3 months a year, unless they could demonstrate that they already knew the relevant material.
That would have been excellent.
Yeah.
In school, like I really should have been, I don't know, I was pissed off that they took away the gifted program, because I went to school and I knew everything that they were teaching me for so long. I had already, like, parents had taught me basic arithmetic, and I read adult level books and it was just like, you had to sit there staring at the clock like, oh my god, are we really like going to do 3 plus 3 right now? Like,
teachers wouldn't even let you quietly read a book.
Yeah,
because then you're not paying attention. Meh.
If I could have tested out, the stuff that I learned, I could have like blown through school. That was the thing. I hated school. It was like just being,
I mean, I can see the arguments for
it was
basic,
just jailing.
Yeah, basic functional skills that massively increase human capital, like literacy.
They don't even teach a lot of those. Like, I'm
No,
also pissed off
most
about
of the time
places
school is
taking home
wasted.
ec out of the curriculum entirely. Where it was like, I remember that in home ec, I actually had one. It's one of the schools that like didn't get rid of their home ec program. They downscaled it a lot, and they made it an elective. But I learned to balance a checkbook, like cook a bunch of different meals. So like, and then like I also had learned a lot of stuff just because my parents, my dad's a carpenter, so I knew how to like fix shit and whatever. It's just like and that was another thing. Yeah, they had shop class as an elective, and I remember finding it hilariously like. It was baby's first woodworking, and I was like, come on, my dad lets me use a jigsaw. like,
yeah,
we're going to make a candle holder.
You're not going to find an argument for me that school sucks. I think that if there's a big section on that isn't like original material, we can probably abridge it.
It's basically all the stuff we've said before.
Yeah, I mean, school sucks.
But everything about school sucks. Yeah, but everything about school sucks applies to everything else about how we restrict young people. It's... you shouldn't have a special carve-out just for school sucks, but then be like, oh, but we have to treat them like infants in all other respects.
I feel like you could fix school and not fix any of those other problems, and vice versa. So I think they are distinct. Oh, not all the other problems. You couldn't like let them, start working full-time and not fix school, right? But
no,
there's some overlap.
You would have to make school not mandatory anymore.
Right.
But I imagine a lot of people would quickly abandon school and go to work if they had that option, because a lot of school is shit and working is actually valuable.
Yeah, totally. And like you mentioned too, it
would maybe force the schools to become better.
I always thought school was basically just working and not getting paid. Like you are working.
But it's not valuable work. It's like dig a ditch and fill it back up.
They called it and then like it's actually fucked up because you're in school 40 hours a week. Right?
Mm-hmm. Basically,
and but then you also have homework.
One of his major complaints about school is that it also nowadays restricts, it stratifies kids by age, so they don't have that interaction with adults. Yeah, throughout history, people have learned from people that are older than them, teaching them things, and even in the early schoolhouses, that was the case. It was one big classroom. And the kids of various ages taught each other. And now you're only allowed to interact, for the most part, most of your day with other kids your age, which he says is absolutely horrible. That's not how humans learn.
Once upon a time, I was gifted, or I was able to pass as gifted at math. And in 6th grade, so my schools went K through 6, 7 through 9, and then 10 through 12. I think middle school we had junior high and high school, so middle school breaks that up somehow differently. I think it's 6 to 8 or something. In any case,
I think that's right.
In 6th grade, I was being bused in the morning to the junior high for math, which I think I quickly stopped doing because I didn't want to. Because it turned out that A, this was harder than I thought, and B, just not fun.
Autonomy.
Yeah.
You made a mistake. You learned from it.
Yeah. But, I definitely... Again, we could sit here patting each other on the back all day about how bad school is, but yeah, that's definitely a problem, right? I know kids who, the teachers struggled to find things for them to do, and they at least tried. All right, cool. Everybody do this except for you two. You guys do the hard shit because you guys clearly demonstrated mastery over the stuff that the rest of the class is doing. I don't think that happens that much. It didn't happen that much in my childhood, and I suspect it happens less now.
Yeah.
But it happened a couple of times, and I think it was valuable for the kids who did really well at it. Because they were able to take advanced in one. I'm thinking at least of two people doing math. they're able to take advanced math courses, for third grade, whatever the advanced version of that was. I found all that beneficial. Yeah, and I suspect the labor thing, I still have my minimum wage thing that I ideologically like, but probably can't economically defend.
Well, one of the things that the minimum wage does is makes it impossible for young people to work because their labor often isn't worth the minimum wage. When I went to work with my dad at 8 and 9 years old, he paid me, I think, $1 an hour initially and bumped it up to $1.50 or $2 once I started learning some things. But yeah, when I first went, I was like handing him tools and stuff. You can't employ someone at $15 an hour to like watch you and hand you tools and maybe sand some wood here and there.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I do think that changes at some point when it's jobs that only adults are allowed to do. And it's like, sorry, yeah, you must be 18 to do this job, but we're only going to pay you $7 an hour.
Why would you ever restrict the job to be only for someone who's 18?
I'm not saying I would. I'm saying today the world does.
That's okay.
Other than, again, too, some level of experience being mandatory. Even if you have 10 years experience because you started when you were 5, I still don't want you wiring my house. And that might be me just being a bigot towards teens. But
I think if you can do surgery at 15, there's some people that have had enough experience by the time they're 15 to wire a house correctly.
I think if I got the choice, I wouldn't want a 15-year-old doing my surgery either. But that's just, again, that could be society having told me that children are incompetent and that I classify teens as children.
I actually decided I wanted to have kids when I was working at the library because I had actually sort of been brainwashed into thinking that kids were incompetent and annoying and boring, and I had few examples of real kids. And the kids at the library that I worked at, though, that was sort of what I was saying earlier about if a terrorist came into the library, there were kids that I would have given it a gun to fight back with first before some of the adults.
The thing is,
I totally trusted them. More than the adults.
Yeah.
To make the right decisions.
I don't, yeah, that's the thing. Some kids are better than adults in some aspects, and adults are worse. I mean, your intuition about not wanting to be surgerized by a 15-year-old is a pretty decent intuition for our society where we do infantilize children people up until they're 18. But in a society that didn't do that, you probably wouldn't have that prejudice because there would be competent 15-year-olds.
I would also just want somebody who's done it 1,000 times. And that there is a causal link between how long you've been doing something and how old you are.
Yeah, but so you could get a surgeon who's 26, 28 years old, fresh out of med school, hasn't done any surgeries ever before as your surgeon, and you don't know that just because he's 28. You don't know if he's done, 100 surgeries or none.
Right, totally. And I in my particular example, I am the kind of person who would want information about my doctors, right? For some reason, some people don't. It's one of the surprising things I learned reading The Elephant in the Brain. People will turn down information about their medical professionals.
They're trusting the system too much.
I guess.
They wouldn't give this person a doctor's license if they didn't know how to doctor. So
Hansen argues that it's because they don't really think it does anything; they're just signaling. But I don't know if that's true of. I don't think he'd make that case about getting your appendix removed because it's exploding, but he'd make that case about some more trivial medicine. In any case, like I said, minimum wage aside for legal adults, I do see the benefit of bringing kids along to work, kids and teens, and again, not having to pay them as much. Part of me sees that as exploitable, and where you might just bring on teens. Sorry, we have to keep putting asterisks next to everything. You might bring on teens to do work that teens probably aren't good at because you can pay them less. I can see there being a perverse incentive there. You need some level of other enforcement.
As an employer, if you have employees that can't do the job, you're really bad at doing whatever you're trying to do. Unless you need competent employees.
Unless you're just cutting corners and trying to make money. If you don't really, I can think of contrived examples. I don't think it's worth generating them, but
I mean, unless there's actual corruption in the system, you're not going to stay in business long if your employees can't do the job.
Can't do it well are different. A lot of people don't care if the person could do it well, but they want someone who will just come in and do it.
Yeah, if your customer doesn't care if the work is shoddy, then Sure, hire a cheaper contractor that does crappier work.
Well, like Colorado's been raising minimum wage for the last few years, and I think we're doing 12 something now, and we're on track to do 15 in a couple of years.
I suppose. I don't know.
That would be nice.
I looked this up in the last few months because I was surprised. Because back when I was working, it was even just a few years ago when I was working jobs that paid minimum wage, it was $7.50.
Yeah,
I made $3 an hour at my second job.
Wow, how did that happen? Was it an internship or something?
No, that was a restaurant.
Oh, right. They're allowed to pay lower.
Yeah, the idea was like, but you get tips, but you never got enough tips that it made up for it.
Okay.
Yeah, so like that's one of the things where the establishment doesn't care if you're, it is systemically, geared against you. Mm-hmm. So I could see them bringing on children to work there, children and teens, just for the sake of having to pay their employees less. But it turns out when you pay them more, they are happier, more attentive, and you get better retention. Well, and that's just something that's happening in Colorado.
Yeah.
Because now I don't need 2 jobs.
Right.
And, I can actually afford to eat and pay my electric bill. I
also think that would be good for the teens. They're learning the job and gaining experience so that, when they turn 16, 17, they can move on to a better job where they're paid more because they've been doing whatever for a couple of years already.
Yeah, totally. Like I said, I was just saying that it's not impossible that someone could fuck that up, but that's me grasping for a gripe. Overall,
it seemed like sorry, you were still talking.
Oh no, I was gonna say overall, I think it sounds like a fine idea.
Yeah, the thing that would be tricky about labor, I think, is like they're trying to prevent exploitation of children, which I don't know how you can how to fix this really in a way that would let kids who want to work, but not have there's kids whose parents force them to work because they need to bring in an income, but they don't want to.
Yeah.
Like there's kids that are forced to drop out of school and go help their parents, and it's like that's kind of.
I mean, the easiest fix would be you can't actually be employed until you have passed one of these competency tests. That way, kids who are competent at 13 can work, and the kids who aren't competent enough can't be forced by their parents to work because the law won't let you work if you haven't passed that test.
Like let's say you pass the test and you're allowed to.
My concern is that a parent could force their kid to work if they don't want to.
But they couldn't if they can't pass the competency test.
Say they're competent, but the parent forces them to work. I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah.
Well, at that point, then they can keep their own wages and move out since they've passed the competency test.
Maybe you don't want to work 50 hours a week to be able to afford your own apartment.
Yeah, I guess being able to emancipate yourself does. Yeah.
It gives you a kind of freedom. It's the freedom like, hey, yeah, you can go live a shit life with, bad amenities and no, whatever, air conditioning or heating.
But the thing you're proposing is better than being subject to slave labor for shit parents, right? Like, if you're in this situation, it's already because your parents are shitlords and you're kind of fucked.
Yeah, solving the problem of shitty parents is going to be harder than rewriting the laws around letting kids work.
I think it's just I don't know. They clearly put that into place. The woman who started all those organizations that look out for the welfare of children. Adams.
Well, that was her last name.
Yeah, I mean, that was a good thing to do, and it was important. There were kids working in factories, like getting injured and being abused, and some of those kids might have wanted to work there though, and some of them would have probably rather gone to school. It's just it was at least one way to prevent kids from, being exploited was to just be like, no kids can work.
It's an easier solution, like you mentioned that 9-year-old Mexican entrepreneur or whatever, right?
And also,
I don't know if that kid was allowed to spend his money on Xbox games or if it was like, sorry, no, that all goes to the family because we need it.
Well, it was his money that he had earned, but his family needed it, which was why he used it to buy food for his family.
Sure, his money that he earned, but unless he can open a bank account, then his parents are strong enough to physically wrest it from him.
Sure,
right? I know. I have friends, and I've had friends who grew up, their parents made them work and took their paycheck.
Oh. Yeah, so again, it would be hard to solve the problem of shit parents, so I'm willing to kind of just set that aside. But it is I think a plausible reason for why some of these things came to be in the first place. Because it's like, yeah, sorry, you could go to school and have prospects, or you can go make 50 cents an hour working in the mines in the really small holes because you're 8. And I can have more money for whatever, right?
Also, all the initial child labor laws targeted either 12 or 13 as the age, and it was pushed up after that, which is less objectionable in my opinion, even though there are still prodigious 12-year-olds that might be getting fucked by this, the fact that it's been pushed up as high as it has is where we start getting crazy stupid land.
There will always be some, exception at the very end of the bell curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it happens to be at 6, someone's actually building a particle accelerator in their garage, right?
Well, which is why we shouldn't have the age limitations. We should have competency limitations.
Yeah, but I do think that if you're going to go broad strokes, then, if you're only fucking over 0.1% of people, it's a lot better than fucking over 60% of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just have to make a better system than what we currently have. We're not trying to...
Any other stuff on labor?
Now we can move on.
I'm curious.
Well, actually, I thought it was fascinating, the part about the economic incentives for driving kids out of the workforce.
Yeah.
It strikes me that also women would have entered the workforce. When did they enter in mass? World War One?
World War II, I believe, was the big major influx.
So, like, with the limited number of jobs and people competing for them, it was also just strategically advantageous to older people to organize. And it even said in the book, like, teens can't really effectively organize to advocate for themselves because, what was it?
They don't stay teens very long.
It was like, it's a temporary
condition.
Category.
Yeah.
It's a temporary condition. I think that's how they said it, yeah. But,
yeah, unlike, women not being allowed to work, where you're stuck being a woman, in 1945 your whole life, where you can actually, like, make a decades-long movement up behind it that you can stay part of. You can't be part of a 10-year movement where you're advocating for teens as a teenager.
Well, you can't, right. I hope to be more involved in this movement, so you can stay in it, but it's not like you're forced to because you're a teenager.
You're not fighting from the inside, yeah
exactly. Yeah, as to your point about the using it to restrict competition, he pulled out one example in 1999. A $45 million construction project in California was shut down by a judge after a carpenters union went after a construction boss for bringing his 12-year-old son around to operate a forklift. And it was very much he's coming in, helping his dad on the weekend kind of thing. But that particular firm was a non-union firm, and so this union had been after them for quite a while, and this was what they got to shut him down with. That his son was allowed to operate a forklift, and it's been used a lot by labor unions and by other employers to restrict the labor supply.
Wait, unions were the baddies here?
yeah.
I know several people who would be like, Pikachu face, why are you shocked? But yes, the point of a labor union is to protect the jobs of its members, which is sometimes good and sometimes not so good.
Yeah, I think that's the most succinct way to put it.
Should I move on to the next topic?
Yeah.
Okay, this next topic we probably don't have to talk about very much because just last week we did a whole episode on it, but it's specifically about love/sex, which is, very important, I think would be an understatement to teenagers, and is not something that is allowed them at all. That there's some allowances made for teenagers fooling around with each other, but even then it's considered not a serious relationship. It's called like puppy love, and it's something that they're expected to get over it and go on to something else as they get older. And the point he makes is that implicit in the laws outlawing sexuality for young people is the assumption that all young people are incapable of experiencing the same kinds of loving feelings that adults do, and that no young people are capable of engaging in sexual activities responsibly.
I'm curious about why it matters that people call it puppy love and that they're expected to move on from it.
Because he says it's demeaning to treat people who are physiologically mature as basically no more mature than animals.
I guess. I sort of feel like people give that same advice to 30-year-olds. Like, oh, you were just infatuated with that person, but, they sucked, and you should move on with your life.
Like,
what?
I think it's the equality thing. I mean, when you're describing that, I was kind of thinking, I don't know, I think it's funny that they're like, oh, teenagers shouldn't be allowed to have sex because they're just gonna, at least you're gonna break up anyway. But, like, I'm like, yeah, but don't most marriages, don't more marriages end in divorce now? Or something like 40%? 50%, okay.
In America, yeah.
And, like, I don't know, it's like, if you're going to make that criticism about teens, you should be making it about adults too. Like, oh, well, 50% of marriages end in divorce, then, we should be allowed to get married if if they're not mature enough. Like,
he also says that teenage relationships are already handicapped by the system. They do move in and out of relationships extremely fast, but he points out, we make it difficult or impossible for young people to marry. We isolate them from potentially more mature, more settled partners. We loudly dismiss their feelings as half-baked. We corral large groups of young people, often against their will, into crowded pens for 9 or 10 months a year. It shouldn't be surprised that they shift partners. A surprise that they shift partners frequently.
This is the loaded language of somebody with an axe to grind. But also, I can't believe that you, Eneasz, are advocating that we let children get married.
So my take on this is that no one should get married. But if we're going to have marriage as a thing that people can do, any person should be able to do it, and young adults count as people. Young people count as people.
It's weird. I'm glad that I wasn't allowed to marry my high school sweetheart.
I am very upset that I was allowed to marry the very first person who showed interest at me when I was 19. So I guess we're on opposite ends of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess...
It sounds like a competence thing.
Yes.
I don't know. This is something where I'm like, I don't know how exactly you would test the competence of like somebody's ability to have a healthy romantic relationship, but... I
mean, I know I was incompetent because... I mean, I bought into this for a lot of reasons, and one of them was that I was a nerd who didn't think I would ever be able to be attractive to a mate. But I was told by not only my parents but my religion, all the people who had influence on me in my early life, that you don't date until you're ready to get married, because the whole point of dating is to find a mate, and when you find a mate, you get married. And since you ain't getting married before you're 18, you ain't dating before you're 18. So I had almost no experience with any sort of intimacy before then. And yeah, I don't think I was competent to make that decision at that point. And maybe I would have been if I hadn't been so restricted from doing those things. But again, I don't know if I would have anyway, just because I was late to mature sexually, I think.
I think many people can relate to, like, because you were barred from your parents, because again, solving the problem of rough parents makes it hard.
There was a lot of things my parents barred me for, which I did anyway. Like, I could have rebelled and secretly dated someone if I really wanted to.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking, like, I think a lot of people had the experience of, getting their first crush, their first date, their first true love of what they thought it was, and then, their first heartbreak, and then only later in life realizing, like, oh, that wasn't real love. That was me learning what it's like to have feelings for somebody. But like, I'm not saying that's everybody. Yeah. I am saying that's me.
I agree with you. I mean, so part of the problem is that, like he says, we're stuck in a corral with our peers, and our role models are other people who are just as stupid and inexperienced as us. Like, in a society where kids interacted more with adults, they would have better role models for these things, and might even be able to find a partner who's had some more experience and knows a few things, being like, okay, kid, slow down. This isn't quite, this is not the ultimate true love forever thing that you might be thinking it is. Let's not rush into getting married right now. Like, one of the tragedies of Romeo and Juliet is that they're fucking 13 and 14 and don't know shit about anything yet. And if they had fit their society's model of what a relationship should be like, they probably wouldn't have been dating each other, because you're usually considered too young to be dating someone your own age at that time.
Yeah, I mean, there's also...
It was much more common for people to have more of a year age gap back then.
Well, and it's just the fact, too, that they were, I think in Romeo and Juliet, part of the point is that they're both politely stupid kids.
Yes, they are.
And so,
wasn't Romeo 21 and Juliet, 17?
No, that was... Usually Hollywood adaptations are a lot around that period, because they're
aging them up to make it
acceptable for modern audiences, yeah. But I believe Juliet... Either Romeo or Juliet specifically were named, and the other one was assumed to be about a year from the first one. So it was either Juliet was named as 13 or Romeo was named as 14 within the play itself.
Yeah, I
want to look this up.
Okay.
I think we talked about that one last episode. I don't have much new on offer there.
Yeah.
I did think...
If you guys want to know about this, we got a whole episode. Just go back one.
I did think of like a rejoinder on the drive home.
Oh, go for it.
Well, like, because we were talking... I was thinking, like, if I was 15... and some 30-something-year-old woman wanted to have sex with me, and you were like, well, there's probably a chance that you simply wouldn't have, if you're given the opportunity. I'm like, no, I think I might have. And in my head, I wish I had said, I was like, oh yeah, if you really didn't want to, your body has ways of shutting that whole thing down. was what you sounded like you were saying. I knew it wasn't what you were saying, but it would have been funny. And I missed that opportunity to make that quip.
In our society, if a 36-year-old woman wants to have sex with you, 15-year-old Steven, it's going to be in secret. It's going to be a thing that's usually not very healthy. Whereas in a more mixed society, you would have peers around both you and her that sees the relationship. And,
could vouch for, like, this woman's not trying to take advantage of this little boy.
Yeah, or be like, hey, the kid's a bit too young for you, that kind of thing. Like, depending on how things are. Having things socially open like that is a huge break check.
By the way, just looked it up. It says that Romeo was never explicitly given an age.
Okay.
But Juliet was 13.
Okay. And Bromeo was always assumed to be within a year or so of her based on things in the play. I don't know, from what I've heard.
Yeah, I don't know.
We were talking too, and this didn't come up in the last episode. I guess the answer would just be abortions, but
there is I didn't put it in here because it's pretty quick, but there is also a section on abortions where he says anyone who is competent should be able to get an abortion at any time without needing to go to their parents or get a special order from a judge or something.
I would carve out an exception that you don't even have to be competent to get an abortion, because you can become pregnant before you're competent.
That's true. Yeah.
Charlie gave like an example of like what happens if you have a romantic experience you don't like, and somewhat sarcastically she said like, "Oh no, I regret it. This is the end of the world." And it's like, yeah, but for some people it's worse. Now you're knocked up, and as a 13-year-old or something, you're not aware of all the wang shriveling sex diseases that are out there, and now you've whatever.
It's the wang shriveling that's the bad part.
Exactly. So like there are lifelong consequences that can happen that you just may not be informed of because you're a child or a youngster.
Yeah. He does cover that in the section on competency, that people know the consequences of sex before they're considered competent.
I did sort of want
to consent.
Sorry. I felt kind of bad. Last episode that we did, where, how did this go exactly? It was Charlie saying that she had like basically gone through all the stuff she had gone through and come out of it okay. And I was like trying to say, like, you seem to be more mature. Like, there are definitely lots of people that get traumatized from sexual experiences. Like, that can happen. There can be really bad PTSD and consequences. I didn't mean to imply that doesn't happen, that we should not care about that. Right. I guess I don't know if I came off as saying that. I just wanted to clarify though that no, but actually also PTSD can happen, and so
I don't think that we downplayed it too much, but we didn't talk about it enough. That there are, and maybe it's because our culture has sex on a pedestal that's 1,000 feet tall, but there are special kinds of even trauma it's definitely the right word, but more broadly, just reactions of violations that can happen in that context that don't happen with getting punched in the face, right? There's something, and maybe it's just because my mind is brainwashed from how we viewed sex or something, but I don't want to get too much into all that stuff, but I will just say that I think that there can be kind of special kinds of ways that can suck that other things don't suck.
Okay.
But we'll push past all that because we talked about sex for 2 hours last time. So
real quick, before we push past it, this is something I should have said last time and neglected to, so I'll go ahead and say it right now. Despite the fact that I think socially we should change our attitudes about, young people in general, I don't think anyone in the U.S. should have sex with a minor if they're outside that age range, despite how much I think it's not necessarily a bad thing because of our laws specifically. There was Yassim from the Bailey podcast is a criminal defense lawyer, and he said in his podcast that he legitimately does not think suicide is an overreaction to getting put on a sexual predator list. Even if it's, with a consenting person and you love each other and all the parents, your society is good with it. If you get on one of those sexual predator lists, your life is basically over. So don't do that.
We didn't even bring that up.
Yeah, it's not a risk worth taking until we can fix society.
I don't even know how to fix society at that point. We need to change people's attitudes about sex.
Fortunately, at the end of this, there's a couple organizations that I can name.
Oh, yeah.
But we haven't gotten quite that far yet. Pushing on then?
Sure.
Okay, shall we move on to the actual competencies and how to implement this sort of thing? Or did you want to touch on the teen brain thing real quick before we did that? You know what, let's do the teen brain thing real quick since it's related to this, very much related to this.
Sure.
Okay. One of the interesting things that he pointed out is that tons of research, he links a lot of things, unequivocally show that cognitive abilities of teens are, on average, superior to cognitive abilities of adults.
Citation not provided.
Well, not in my notes here.
I know.
But all the metrics of brain performance tend to top out around 17, 18, and then slowly decline from there. And he says that by the time adults are in their 80s, they usually have roughly the same mental functioning as a child in between the ages 6 and 8, just in terms of how quickly and how well the brain works. And he does, make give the proviso that a lot of things come down to experience and the knowledge you have accumulated, which is why adults can often be much more competent, much more able to do things that take a lot of intelligence because they already have all this stored up knowledge and experience in them.
Yeah, but they have that crystallized intelligence.
Yes. But in terms of pure functionality, the brain is at its peak in the late teens and only goes downhill from there, which made me very sad because it means I'm stupider.
I've also heard things that contradict this, so I'm a little puzzled.
Okay.
I do agree that I've seen pretty clear evidence that there are children who are as intelligent as adults. And that in general, I don't know, I keep thinking of the library again, where it was like, there was this huge tech gap it was kind of hilarious, where like, the adults would come in for free tech support for their stuff all the time, and I just was like baffled at the amount that people couldn't use, like they didn't have basic problem solving skills. There were just some like pretty dumb adults in there, and there were kids that could take your laptop apart and put it back together. And a lot of that is just sort of the kids like pick stuff up faster. Like we were talking about the kids teaching themselves to program by like being handed an iPad and like, here, have fun.
He does cite a thing that shows that it's much harder to acquire new skills after the age of 30.
I disagree with...
Again, as a general, not necessarily an age cutoff.
Or rather, there's actual facts to be had here, and I could be wrong, but like my understanding though is that the brain doesn't necessarily get worse as you age.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you stop making new connections as fast. That's because you've already made connections. So it's like, and a lot of learning is pruning in connections that aren't useful. If you
keep being a lifelong learner, like there's people that are completely cognitively sharp in like their 70s, 80s, etc. And like I don't know, that there's like the stereotype about old people being bad with technology, which actually used to really piss off somebody from my Philly Less Wrong group who was an older person and like had a computer and a cell phone and like knew what apps were, and like it's like I hate that stereotype about, and I was just like, well, you haven't seen the majority of old people. They don't even try to learn how to use this thing. There were people that would come in the library repeatedly asking me to log them into like an account of theirs, and I was like, this is easy, I could teach you to do this, it's a few steps.
I think
but you can do it for me.
I think part of the problem is the don't even try thing, and he does state that we tend to discourage people from being lifelong learners, and more like you cram in all the learning up to 18, whether you're ready for it or not at that age, whether you want to be doing it or not, and then after 18 you stop learning, as opposed to people should be learning and working all throughout their post-pubescent lives.
Compulsory learning for the whole life. I like it.
Not necessarily compulsory, but there is a section where he says back in the schooling section, the way that we have mandatory schooling that fucks people up on schooling often gives people both a lifelong maybe fear, maybe hatred, aversion to learning due to the compulsory experiences of being cooped up in school prisons for so many years.
Learning wasn't fun.
Yes, yeah. Learning was literally a way that you were tortured.
I've had to basically plant the seeds of joy of science in my wife since we've been together for like 10 years, but enough bad science teachers through junior high and she just never developed an enjoyment of the subject. And I'm like, no, but it's actually really cool. You said shit teachers. And it took a while for that to stick.
I hated math, and a lot of it probably had to do with the fact that I was actually bullied by a math teacher in 3rd grade. Which is just wild. This teacher would bully kids to, I guess, like...
Those people shouldn't have teaching jobs. They're like Snape. Why are you with children when you hate children?
Snape at least had a good reason.
Did he?
Yeah, I mean, like he could have been groundskeeper, sort of. I guess, or whatever. But like, but he was there for cover for for a war effort.
Okay,
I'm way more sympathetic of Snape than I am of half the teachers I had in elementary school.
Right. Yeah.
They
weren't secret spies.
Yeah, I do have a couple like things to pull out here. One, I do want to see this unequivocal research that the cognitive abilities of teens are, on average, superior to the cognitive abilities of adults.
And again, by cognitive abilities, he means like the firing of neurons and making new connections, that kind of thing.
Well, then that's a very specific use of cognitive abilities. Like, yes, as a 10-year-old, I could pick up a new video game way faster than my grandma could because she never held a video game controller before.
It's easier to pick up languages when you're young, too.
Yeah.
Because like, there's learning modes that your brain like snaps into.
Yeah.
If you pass those... It's kind of like your brain kind of evolves for different or metamorphoses for different purposes as you age, where you get more stability. You get better ability to like regulate emotions and much lower anxiety and depression when people are older. Yeah. But you're also less able to bend in the wind. I guess
one of the things
less flexible.
He tends to really have a visceral dislike of the term teen brain because of the thing that you brought up. He said, our brains keep changing all throughout our lives. It's an ongoing process, and there's a lot of things that we do which change our brain. Like, I mean, on the simplest example, any kind of learning is literally changing your brain. And he says, things like meditating, reading, having sex, anything that affects your mind changes your brain a bit. And that brains do change all throughout your life. So calling a teen brain specifically this terrible time in life because you don't have a frontal cortex is bullshit. It's developing just like every other part of your brain and body are.
Yeah, and like the ways that teen brains are different from adult brains are adaptive, not like a byproduct of the process. Yeah. Not because it's not fully formed yet.
Yeah, if my grandma has a lower mental acuity or mental speed score than I do, she compensates for it with a higher wisdom and again, intelligence is a tough word.
What's
there.
Your dexterity?
Right, but that's true, right? So like, I would have to sit and figure something out, and she's like, oh, I remember that from 50 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So
he calls that out.
Yeah, I have two more quick things to pull out on that about the teen brain cognitive ability stuff, because we talked about incompetent technological adults and stuff. We were talking about learned helplessness earlier, and it's remarkable how often you see that with some people, even in their 50s, with cell phones and shit, right? Blows my mind.
Yep.
So you don't have to be a tortured child to have learned helplessness. You are just, for whatever reason, don't feel like learning how to use your phone, and then you therefore never do. But I remembered in, I don't know, primary school at some point, we're talking about technological advancement or something, and if maybe this is less of a problem now than it was then, although I suspect it's not, because my wife still works with people who don't know how to use their fucking computers. When they all retire, the next generation of people who come in will know how to use their computer and send, email a PDF, right?
And I had researcher coworkers who had sort of that adult-itis around technology too. I was like, how do you have a neuroscience bachelor's, but you can't figure out how to do this email thing?
Yeah, if you can't grab an attachment from an email and print it, then how do you have a job here? Yeah. But I remembered I had a teacher who was, I think, defending their inability to handle the computer properly or something, and they're like, oh yeah, it's just all been changing so fast. You guys will all be there when you guys get to be our age. And even at my young age, I was like, no, we won't. We have been on the cusp of fast-moving technology our whole lives. I picked up a video game controller when I was, 6 or 10 or something, and have picked one up every year since then. Put on a VR headset a few years after they came out. I don't think that's an inevitability like people of this generation talked about. Yeah. I felt like I was going to drive that home somehow to this point, but maybe it was just about the mental acuity stuff.
No, there's something there that I feel like.
Anyway.
Yeah. Whatever.
He does also specifically call out the Jurgelin Todd research, which I guess is the study which popularized the term teen brain because they used it, I suppose. But he said that their research, nor the research of anyone else that I'm aware of, provides the scientific evidence needed to support the claims made in their article. So he specifically says that they are overreaching and their claims are not supported by their own evidence. So that is something I can't get into because I haven't read any of them. Basically, they were
the ones that were saying that teen brains are
that they
unformed and
that they don't have a frontal cortex. And that's why they can't make decisions or delay gratification or whatever. And that was basically just a straight out. I don't believe your numbers are correct, sir. Call out.
And I'll have to, like I said, check this guy's numbers. Because again, research unequivocally proves, and I'm like, you show me social science that unequivocally proves anything.
That's fair.
But
this is a persuasive book, though, right? This isn't
right
a science book. He's citing stuff to support his point, but
bringing it home now with proposed changes. I guess we can skip over the competency part.
I'd be curious about different ways that, I don't know if there were novel ways that people propose to measure competency.
There
you can give a IQ test and you can get, someone's intelligence, but what about?
There actually are competency tests that are suggested in here. There's one specifically called the Epstein-Dumas something test, which I guess he developed in combination with someone else. And you can test yourself, sort of a little at-home test, which is not quite as...
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's not quite as rigorous, I guess, but it's in the first appendix in the book called How Adult Are You?
I probably am very adult in some areas and sort of still at child-level competency in others.
That's what he says, actually, that there's, a wide variety, and you can be competent in some areas and not others, and so we should give people more rights in some areas and not others. His main thesis is that the laws assume all young people are the same and all adults are the same as well.
And stay the same.
And that this is a bad assumption and shouldn't be based on age anyway. And so he has these proposed changes that he makes. The primary one being, as I said, we should give people more rights over time as they pass competency tests rather than due to passing a number of days alive test.
I would like to be given a competency test judging whether or not I can make my own medical decisions.
Yeah, that was, if we get time for a fast Q and, rapid fire thing at the end, I want to do that.
So that you can choose your own drugs that you want to take?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's basically the banned goods store again.
Yeah. That was one of the things I liked about Mexico. At their pharmacies, you just go and order your drugs you want, and they're like, here you go.
At the kiosk at the airport, you get to do that.
Nice.
Yeah, coming back from Cancun for our honeymoon, I mean, you could buy probably not the great stuff, but there was Tramadol, Viagra, a handful of other things, and I was like, well, I would just buy this, but I'm not gonna, have them take it away from me in customs when I get back to the U.S. So
yeah, the assumption is if you're old enough to know the drugs that you want to be / should be taking, then you're old enough to buy them.
I sort of want there to be a competency test there too. I do agree that when it comes to the banned goods store, if you can measure, and I think there's model measurements of this, the expected utility of having the banned goods store versus not, it's going to weigh in favor of having the banned goods store, but then the main reason people want things to be banned is to protect people from themselves.
Yeah.
But you could also just have okay, you can go in the banned goods store, but you have to take a competency test to show that you know what drugs you're buying and that you're aware of its side effects and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not super on topic, just...
It's
not interesting how it keeps coming up, though.
Yeah, it's not far off topic. I mean, I do have knee-jerk reservations about a generic competency test, just because, they used to have that for voting, and it just turned out that black people never passed this test.
Right.
Right? So, it's... I don't know how you'd make it fair. Even... I think IQ tests are probably better now than they were 30 years ago. But even that had, some cultural stuff in it.
They're still not perfect, though.
Yeah.
That is, actually, the fact that there are different racial IQs, at least in terms of, people from Africa tending to score really low on these IQ tests, seems to be an artifact of just, these are people who've never taken... Some of these people are people who've never taken a standardized test.
Right.
And are just, they just don't know how to take tests,
Yeah, for me, I think the simplest explanation for the Flynn effect, where they have to recalibrate so that the mean score on an IQ test stays 100 every few years, is that people are just better test takers than they were, a few years ago.
I hadn't considered that, but that's a possibility.
Has IQ leveled out?
I don't know.
According to the Flynn effect, it has.
That's, because
that they have to keep adjusting the IQ tests, so...
Wasn't the main thing, though, something to do with either people getting more nutrition or... getting less lead.
Again, that would change the general IQ, and that would lead to the Flynn effect. Yeah.
Those are both good candidates, and the last time I heard about the Flynn effect was 15 years ago. So like I have no idea if it is done being if it has tapered off or not. But I would submit that at least part of it is that if I'm sitting down to take my first pen and paper test at 50, I'm probably going to suck at it, even if I'm smart. Whereas if I've been taking pen and paper tests 4 times a week since I was 6, I will probably do fine at it, even if I'm dumb.
Yeah,
right?
You know a lot of the techniques and general test taking skills.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad you brought out there's some places I think I'm competent and others I don't, because he does think that young people should be extended full adult rights and responsibilities. This is a thing that comes up often. I'm going to stop quoting him just for a second. Throughout the book, that it's not just about rights and freedoms. It's about the responsibilities that come with them, and those two together make for competent people that can run their own lives. That it's you once you have the ability to make these decisions for them yourself, you also face the consequences of getting them wrong.
And that's motivating, though, in a way that, like...
That's a big part of it, yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know, having the artificially constrained choices makes you just sort of not even want to try.
Yeah. And that's also, again, didn't hammer on this because we're going long as it is, and we've been going on it for a while, but that's also a big theme in the book, so... Know that is also in there. If you decide to read it, you will pick up on that as well.
The responsibility part is important because it's not just about like they should be allowed to do whatever they want. It's like they should be allowed to, have the consequences of doing whatever they want.
A large part of the thesis is basically the Spider-Man credo: with great power comes great responsibility. And he's saying, if you give people more responsibility, they will have more power in their own lives. And vice versa. It goes together.
Well, if you'd mentioned Spider-Man 2 hours ago, you'd have sold me earlier. No.
If you want more people to be Spider-Man.
I think also having a sense of self-efficacy is one of the things that'll push down on conditions like depression and anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
They brought up the statistic of how many mental health drugs are being administered to teens now.
Just so you can make it through these lives when you have nothing you can do.
I wish I had antidepressants when I was in high school.
I mean, it's one way to deal with this constant learned helplessness and prisoning that you're in. Anyways, young people should be extended full adult rights and responsibilities in each of a number of different areas as soon as they can demonstrate appropriate competence in each area. A young person of any age who can pass a state-approved adult competency test should be able, without court involvement, to receive a certificate of emancipation from the state. He leans towards young people achieving a score that is at least the 50th percentile for adults 18 and over, meaning that on each test, the applicant must score higher than half of adults currently do, which I think is entirely reasonable. Yeah. If you're more competent than half of the people over 18, why would we deny you of those rights?
Because we want to control kids.
Yes, exactly. That is a big part of it.
Well, at some point...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, wouldn't that lead to 15 years down the road, people being very, very competent and the bar being raised really high for 14-year-olds?
Yes.
That would be a good thing.
Yeah, that would be a great thing. And maybe eventually we might have to lower it to like the 40th percentile or something if we believe that it is barring too many people from getting rights. But it is a great starting area. And yeah, I do think it would be a good thing if more people were more competent more earlier in life.
I'd love to see... businesses run by teenagers.
Yes. Like,
teenagers are more creative. They're, like...
very driven.
Yeah, they know, like, the latest cutting-edge technology stuff. Yeah, what was the part in here where they said something about an obsession?
Yes, that prodigies... usually a prodigy is just a young person with an obsession and an opportunity.
Yeah.
That was the quote.
It's a good bumper sticker.
Yeah.
I think that type of thinking... I mean, I know when I'm thinking back to like my teen years, it's like that version of me would have come up with much better business ideas than the version of me I am now. Just like, I don't know. There's a way that like I look at my old art sometimes and like my new art is technically better because I have more experience, but it's also like more boring. I had like just a lot of ideas and drew lots of different things. I was way more motivated. Yeah, I'd really love to see what kinds of like business ideas teens would come up with, or kids like releasing media, like making. So like that brought to mind. I was like, oh, there are kids making money on YouTube, and I think other avenues.
In places where kids are allowed to excel, they often do great. He said that chess is one of the few places where we allow young people to compete against adults And they often do, well, some of them do extremely well because of that, because there aren't artificial limitations placed on them.
We mentioned this at the top, and I know we're kind of wrapping up, but like, again, it kind of devolved into like, parents suck and can take away your computer. But assuming that you can solve that problem, you do get you get immense freedom online.
I mean, you should have property rights at a certain age too.
Mm-hmm. Sure, but even if you have property rights, but you can't afford a $800 computer, it's because you're only getting paid $1 an hour because your labor's worth shit. But it's if you want to create stuff, you can create stuff. If you want to learn about a new subject, you can do that, right? And so the advent of everyone having a computer in their pocket, I think it changes the landscape a lot, and that wasn't quite the case in 2008. It was barely emerging.
Part of the problem of not having an $800 computer when you're a kid is even if you have a great idea and motivation, literally no one will give you a loan because you cannot be held to any kind of contract. The right to be in a binding contract is important because then you can take out even an $800 loan for a computer so you can get started on your little thing that you want to do.
Yeah. That's part of where it'd just be nice, assuming your parents have $800 that they could lend you money.
Well, yeah, I mean, you'd have to get it from your parents under the current regime, but if you took one of these tests and were emancipated enough to be able to sign contracts, you could go to a bank or some other place that gives out loans and take out an $800 loan and get started on your life.
Yeah. I think then the concern would, just to bog that down while we're trying to not do that, is that your skills are worth so little that you'd pay that back so slowly. But then again, $800 isn't that much money. So
exactly.
You're not asking for $80,000, right?
Yeah.
Not like 17-year-olds going to school.
Yeah.
One main thing I like about the proposed changes here is how sane they seem to be.
Yes.
So it's not like do away with mandatory schooling, do away with labor laws and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. He's like, no, like let's put like sensible things on that. Mm-hmm. It's not saying get rid of mandatory schooling. It's saying let's cut down the hours and the time that you need to do it.
Yeah.
If you can read, write, and balance a checkbook by 13, great, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
There's some sensible thing there.
Yeah. I think this extends beyond just kids too. For example, like the person in an old folks home, or maybe not even an old folks home. There's definitely age discrimination on both sides in hiring. Because of the stereotype that old people are bad at computers or, slower or less cognitively flexible.
Can't learn things
and
anymore.
That's true for some people. I mean, dementia, Alzheimer's do exist.
Mm-hmm.
And some people also just, don't maintain their brain, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So you do see people decline if they're just not interested in reading or going outside or learning anything new. But, that doesn't mean that all old people are going to be bad at the job either. If they pass the competency test, they should be allowed to, be considered a candidate for a software engineer job or whatever.
He says that the incentives for young people to prepare for the test will be enormous because of all these rights that you get, but also responsibilities. And even if they don't pass all the tests, they still benefit from the process of preparation. And I remember, I think it was after our last episode on the Discord, someone was complaining about this idea of judging people based on competency. He was like, well, a really smart young kid could do really good on an IQ test, or, someone who's really smart can trick a psychologist into declaring them competent. And I said, that's literally the point. If you can convince a psychologist that you are mentally mature enough to have rights, then you're mentally mature enough to have rights. You have just demonstrated that. And if you can't trick them into that, then obviously you don't deserve those rights yet. So, I mean, sure, there could be literally malicious psychologists, like you were saying, trying to deny rights to black people. But, it seemed at that point the person was just trying to say, what if someone who's young is declared competent? That would be terrible. And I'm like, no, that's the whole point.
I think, and I didn't read the exchange, but to steelman that, what if somebody who was young was declared competent when they actually weren't? If there's a multiple choice test involved, there's some luck. Mm-hmm. If you don't know, you just choose B, and you got a 25% chance of being right. So, you could squeak by while still being under the actual threshold to the magic way that we've managed to measure this, right?
An adult could do this too.
But that's kind of like an owned risk. I'd be surprised if he doesn't call that out in the book. Be like, yeah, that could happen, but that there's no way that can't happen.
Right. And if you're doing better than 50% of adults, assuming that a portion of the adults got lucky that way too, right?
Yeah.
That should take...
I definitely have had coworkers who sort of faked their way into the job.
I feel like I faked my way into every job I ever got.
No, I mean I've also faked my way into jobs in the sense of I've felt imposter syndrome about it, but like I'm talking about people who thought that they had the necessary skills and put it on their resume, and then like in the field they clearly didn't know what the hell they were doing, or they weren't very good at management or leading.
Yeah. I love what's the opposite of an imposter? I can't think of the word for
authentic?
it. Yeah, authentic syndrome, maybe you could call this, or somebody thinks they can actually do it, but they can't.
Yeah.
I've worked with people like that too.
Isn't that just Dunning-Kruger? What we've been calling Dunning-Kruger?
Sort of. It's
maybe.
Definitely related.
Yeah, sometimes it's just people just like, oh yeah, no, I got this. And it's like, no, you don't got this. Where for the most part, people are like, oh, I can't do this. It's like, no, you actually can. Just take a deep breath. I do like this too. You know, any young person, no matter what his or her age, should be allowed to apply for any job. And it's just, yeah, if you can do it, you get paid for it. And if you can't, you don't. Mm-hmm. And you probably get paid to the extent that you're good at it.
Yeah. It says if he or she can demonstrate appropriate competencies, he or she should be taken seriously as a candidate. If he or she performs poorly, he or she should be fired, just like any adult. Also interesting to note, this was back in 2008, people were still using he or she instead of they. And cultures changed fast.
I think that was what they were teaching as proper. It's clunky though.
Yeah. And yeah, he does the thing about school, which you already mentioned. School should have shorter compulsory hours, a shorter compulsory school year, fewer required school years. The mandatory schooling should focus on the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic, and citizenship. Interesting that he includes citizenship.
I actually really like that addition.
Yeah.
I mean, teaching you your rights.
Yeah.
Which, like, then you can take a test to see if you understand what that means and whether you have the maturity to do it. I wish that, like, I guess we have, like, civics classes, sort of, but we don't really have, like, unless you like, go into law, or government. We don't learn very much about that, or at least I didn't. Yeah. Maybe I just had a bad curriculum, but I was like, yeah, I don't know.
I went to what I think is a very good high school, like, as far as public schools go, and I had one elective civics course. I think that was all that was available. It's just something that isn't stressed enough.
Oh, yeah, that was something I wanted to bring up at the school part, but like the whole idea of school being sort of where we like put teens to train them to be office workers. Mm-hmm. Like there was definitely incentives there from the Industrial Revolution to just train a bunch of like robotic employees to do manual labor, or not manual labor, desk labor.
He goes on to say that competent young people should be given full property rights, and concedes that we do lose a degree of control over them, but I think he thinks that's a feature, not a bug. In return, we get more responsible, secure, and independent young people. And he says that even if unemancipated, young people of any age who can demonstrate appropriate competencies should be able to make and revoke wills, sign contracts, file lawsuits, and represent themselves in court. After all, we automatically extend such rights to many older people who lack the appropriate skills and understanding. Sick burn.
There was my next door neighbor, when I was like living in New Jersey and growing up at my parents' house. The house next door was owned by this woman who, she was a divorced single mom and had a teenage daughter, or maybe not divorced, the dad might have been dead, but anyway, I thought this was great. The mom was kind of a bitch, and when the daughter turned 18, she inherited the house and kicked her mom out.
Oh, wow.
And then I remember like all the older people in the neighborhood were like, oh, there's like some teenager owning her house here. It's going to be like,
how dare she?
She's going to crash it. She's going to have wild parties. Actually, no, she was the responsible homeowner.
Mm-hmm. He also says that no curfew should be allowed in the country at all unless it's for everyone, excluding emergency personnel. Emancipated young people should be able to move about freely as adults. The wanderings of unemancipated young people will have to remain under parental control because parents of dependent offspring are held responsible for their wrongdoing. Again, another one of those incentives to pass these competency tests.
Were there curfews for children?
There are often in many places, yes.
Is that new? Because I mean,
that's been around for ages.
I guess I ran into cops. I had my probably above average share of run-ins with the police when I was a kid, and I never had one say, "You're out too late. I'm calling your parents."
Apparently, it's a problem with people that unschool their kids. If like they'll get ratted on by neighbors, or a cop will come up to them and be like, "Hey, you should be in school right now," and a lot of them like train their kids to kind of say, "Oh yeah, no, I'm homeschooled and we're on recess right now."
I think it's also a lot of it is selective enforcement, where you look, rich and white, so we're not going to bother with you. but you look like a member of the underclass, so we're going to enforce the curfew on you.
I can't rule that out. I mean, I was hassled, but, maybe Fort Collins in 2003 didn't have curfews. I have no idea. I do like this one. I don't want children, them, he says, but I'm assuming he means youngsters, to feign adulthood by drinking and smoking in dark alleys. I want them to be adults by drinking and smoking responsibly. To the extent that young people overindulge, I think there's only one legitimate solution: to integrate them into adult society. I will caveat, he doesn't say that adults don't overindulge. Most alcoholics are probably old enough to buy their own alcohol, right? Yeah. So I don't know if that's the solution, but that's part of the solution, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, there's European countries that people always bring this up, where if you normalize drinking, the kids grow up with, like, a much...
healthier drinking habits?
Yeah, like...
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. They are most vulnerable to mischief when they're with their peers and less vulnerable when they're with adults. Yeah. He's arguing that their peers are incompetent, but but then they're not their peers. He means other people their age. Yeah. Regarding pornography, I believe that young person who can pass an appropriate test of maturity. Again, this is different than the competency test. This is a maturity test. I'm sure he talks about what that is somewhere in the book.
Yeah, that's one of the tests where I'm like, I wonder how you could judge competency here.
Yeah.
Ability to own pornography.
I mean, if you can look at the boobie, you can buy the boobie.
I don't even know how, like, if you go on, like, Pornhub, I think, or wherever, don't they usually just have a pop-up that's like, I swear I'm over 18?
I've like, been to a number of sites where there isn't even a pop-up.
Yeah. It's sort of, yeah, like, if you're looking for it.
Yeah. I guess just not...
Like, an actual porn shop, I guess, could actually ID people, like, when they walk in, but, like, that's... I don't know.
It'd be nice that if you've passed the competency test, you can go in and buy your own sex toys.
Yeah.
Yeah, he talks about violence with young people, which is like, all right, well, when they're emancipated, it's just like hitting an adult. It's a crime.
Yeah.
There's some special carve-outs for striking non-competent children.
Yeah, he says that if you're emancipated, then it should be treated as a crime, just like if you hit an adult. Parents have the right to strike unemancipated children, the same as they do now. He does say, they have a duty to show that corporal punishment was reasonable and appropriate, so it's not like you're abusing your children, and that you've tried other ways of behavior management. But yeah, basically, once you're emancipated, you can't get spanked anymore, because that's assault and battery, and yet another reason to maybe try to get that competency test done.
Yeah, I kind of think that, especially in the last decade and a half, that things have moved past, like, the coolness of hitting your kids, which I'm super in favor of. Mm-hmm. I get that, like...
Wait, you're in favor of...
The fact that that's less popular now than it was before. Yeah,
in favor of hitting your kids.
Right, gotcha. Yeah. I never liked the argument, well, I was hit as a kid, and it's like, yeah, and that's...
I turned out fine.
Well, and, like, but that never made any sense to me. Like, oh, well, I went through it. It's like, well, tough. Yeah, I'm sorry that happened.
Some people are more sensitive than others. Sort of the same thing with the, like, trauma...
Yeah, all of us have been put through this bullshit that we're talking about right now when we were kids, and yet I don't think that's an excuse to keep doing it.
Right. Yeah, I never liked...
incentive to stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He says young people of any age who can pass a test that shows they will be competent voters should be given the right to cast full votes in relevant elections, which...
People now don't have to do.
Yeah, well, first of all, people now don't have to do, but, like... You were saying this was a way to suppress voting among minority populations for a long time, so I don't know if they would have to be...
develop a test that, like, is thoroughly reviewed and I guess, like, experts in... I don't know what field that would be.
Social sciences.
I guess social sciences can, like, say that this is, like, a test that's designed to be maximally non-racist.
I think society isn't the best place we've ever been to design such a test.
Yeah. Also, importantly, like, I think you should be able to appeal any of these sorts of test decisions to an outside area, because, like...
What do you mean?
Well, because a lot of the, say, reading comprehension tests done in the South in the 50s, people passed them just fine. Like, they were more literate than some of the white people they were taking the tests alongside, and yet when the test was judged, it was marked as a failure because the person judging it could see, this is a black person, I don't want them to vote. Sorry, you're not literate. So this should be one of these things that, like, if you're test is marked as failed, you could potentially go to a different area, different judge, and be like, hey,
Yeah,
can you look at this? Because, I think that he flunked it because I'm black and not because I'm not old enough, not mature enough.
Yeah, I like especially the caveat of going somewhere else. Like, if you just took it to the same, whatever, courthouse or something, then that same asshole will just cut you down again.
I'd really like to live in a country where young people were allowed to vote. Like, it's irritating that just age is what drives a lot of our policies.
Yeah.
Because old people vote, young people don't. I mean, like, young people don't because they're not old enough to, or the ones that are apathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of don't blame them.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting, again, into this sort of the voting topic.
Yeah.
But I think this, just having a voting test, a competency test for voting would, I think, across the board, like, make a lot of things better. If you could make one that's non-racist, and that would be an incentive for people to, like, again, take the civics class.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know, just the empowerment.
Yeah. It says, when you say to young people, okay, you want to be adults, show us what you can do, many will rise to the challenge. We will be tapping into one of the most basic of evolutionary imperatives, the desire to be independent. And as the number of young people who pass various tests or who achieve full emancipation multiplies, adults will have no choice but to see young people through competency-colored lenses. So he's very bullish on this thing working out.
Yeah, I mean, I think he makes a compelling case. You know, some of it he does. I need to dig into some of the science that he cites because, you know, you can't say this unequivocally proves my point and then if I don't get to read it, then I'm like, oh, I just have to take your word for it that your point is unequivocally proved.
Yeah.
But that aside, you know, I think this is a sane case. I know this is probably pushing one of our longer episodes, but I did have a couple quick rapid fire ones that I'll trim down for sake of brevity.
Yeah, do it.
You know, like, I don't know if the jury's still out on alcohol on developing brains or not, and I don't think a brain, again, unless some of his research that he found proves me otherwise, but I do think that there's some, you know, we talked about the malleability and sharpness, acuity of young brains as opposed to older brains. Mm-hmm. You know, if say getting drunk damages that, I don't know if a young person understands what they're doing to themselves if they're getting drunk every night, right?
Yes. Well, so two counterpoints. The first one being that, like the Rad Park experiment showed, when you give an actual enriched environment to people, they often just don't take the drugs because they have better things to do.
Oh, that reminds me of the rat experiment. The rat utopia.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons people turns to drugs in prisons and in schools, because they just need something to make their lives not horrible as they're trying to get through these years of doing nothing. And the rats that...
Have we talked about the rat utopia
I think so.
before? Should I, like, tell the
give
listeners
a brief
what
summary.
It is? They got a bunch of rats addicted to cocaine. Was it cocaine,
I think it was morphine.
Morphine, yeah.
But they could...
Anyway, they had rats in a, like, shitty, boring environment, and they gave them access to drugs.
And they would
so
push
they
that lever
took
a
the
lot.
drugs, and they got addicted to the drugs, but even the ones that they had gotten addicted at that point, if they put them in rat heaven, like, which was like a little playground with other rats to interact with and different types of food, just novelty choices, etc., then the rats would unaddict themselves to the morphine.
Not all of them. There was like some small percentage that just biologically were addicted, but almost all of them, just stopped taking the drugs when they had better things to do with their time.
Yeah, like the drugs still have a bad effect, but it was like, it definitely improved the rats. Like, first of all, some of them, like, if you just started them out in the rat playground and gave them access to the drug, a lot of them just wouldn't even take it, or they'd take it a few times, but it wouldn't stick.
Yeah.
The ones that, like, were heavily addicted at that point, then there's biological stuff going against.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So part of the counter argument is just that people won't be doing drugs or alcohol nearly as much when they can have meaningful, fulfilling lives and relationships. And the other counter argument is that, like, as he said, half of seniors and juniors in high school are already drinking a lot. You're not actually helping the problem. And who knows, maybe you're making it worse.
I don't know if the fact that people are already doing it means, well, let's just make it legal then.
I think it would be safer if it was legal.
That's the case for every crime.
Right. Well, I mean, that's also why we, well, I don't know about you, but I personally am for drug legalization as well. Having a drug prohibition has not stopped people from taking drugs at any significant rate, and it has made things much, much worse overall.
No, I mean, I'm not insane. I'm also in favor of drug legalization. I'm just wondering if it did turn out that, I don't know, insert drug, cocaine, turned out to be just radically more damaging to a young brain than to an older brain. Weed might be an example.
There's an argument to be made for people should be over 21, I think, to smoke weed, or I forget if it was 21 or 18, but there is actually there's some evidence that it might be more harmful when your brain is still developing, which is like, I'm actually getting a bit confused about that right now as I'm thinking about it, because, and I think, Steven, you brought this up earlier, I think one of the main things that, like, people were worried about with smoking weed before age 21, it was the whole, like, the brain's not developed yet. But that's not actually true. Mm-hmm. It might just be that, like, the brain is in a more malleable state, so it could cause more harm. But, like, one of the things that you were saying could happen is if you have latent schizophrenia, it could activate it. But that could just be an artifact of, like you were saying, but you tend to develop it around that age.
Right.
The weed might not have anything to do with it.
Also, if your brain is more malleable, that means it's also more able to recover.
Yeah.
Well, unless you're using drugs throughout that entire period. Like, you know, I listened to might have been somebody on one of Sam Harris's podcasts or somewhere, maybe Very Bad Wizards. She was concerned about the overprescription of, like, antidepressants. You know, if you're on antidepressants from age 10 through 30, your brain never developed into adulthood without antidepressants.
Right.
And that could lead to, we don't know what kind of problems. So, I mean, I guess I was kind of just wondering, you know, if you could ever see an example where, like, actually, no, it turns out that this is uniquely damaging to young people, to young minds. We should make a special case for this.
I think if there was enough evidence, I'd be in support of that.
Okay.
I'm actually questioning, though, whether that's true.
Me too. It's not like I can point to something and say, what about this? I know this is for a fact. I'm just thinking hypothetically.
Yeah.
The other one was...
Although, I don't know if I would be in favor of a straight-up ban. I think, like, if there might be a competency, like, hey, I'm, you know, an informed adult, and I am choosing to do this, and that should still be your choice.
This actually ties me into the next thing really well, which is medical freedom. Like, I'm a big fan of especially now, in, what is it, May 31st, 2021, of compulsory medicine.
You're in favor of compulsory medicine?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't like the fact that half my neighbors aren't going to get a COVID vaccine.
Okay.
You know, so, like, I don't get me wrong, there's all kinds of downsides with, you know, how this has gone horribly in the past, how this could go terribly wrong in the future. But in a society that didn't suck, I think it would be great to take that freedom away from people. I mean, and say, look, sorry, you don't get to decide that you get to drive 10 miles over the speed limit and with your eyes closed just because it's your personal freedom.
There's already legal precedent for compulsory vaccination. Like, this was a thing that happened back in, God, I want to say the smallpox era, 36 or something. I don't remember exactly when it was, but
well, they make kids take what is it, booster shots?
But this was an adult who didn't want to get vaccinated for this thing, and the state took him to court, and eventually the Supreme Court ruled, no, it doesn't matter what you want. This is of sufficient public interest that you will get this vaccine.
I think the distinction is, I don't want any laws protecting people from themselves.
Right.
But when you could harm others with your actions is, I think, when you need to, like...
Which is why the Supreme Court came down on the state side in that point.
Because, like, you can make if I make a personal choice that only affects me, you know, well, I don't know why I'm even explaining this. Yeah, nobody else would be harmed, so I should be able to make that choice.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine what medical decision... Well, I could think of one, maybe that... All right, so I've got... I was going to say it's hard to think of, like, a medical decision that just does affect you that I might have a contention with, but I can think of one that might get us canceled. So give me a second to finish up my thing on the COVID vaccine. Like... I did see a thing where apparently a concert in Florida, tickets are $18 if you're vaccinated, and they're $1,000 if you're not.
Nice.
Now, I don't know if this will do anything, you know, because how do you prove you're vaccinated? You give them this easily fakeable card. But, you know, it's that kind of stuff I'm kind of in favor of. I was at a mall yesterday to pass time before going to the movie, and one of the stores said, if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask. And it's like, I'm not carrying my vaccination card. This is I'm assuming, a trust basis thing, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, at Milk, they were literally checking people's vaccine cards. So, you know, I laminated mine. I have it in my wallet. But on the other hand, they would let people in that weren't vaccinated yet if they stayed masked the whole time. but inside there wasn't anyone going around to
Nobody
unmask
enforcing it.
people. Yeah.
And you
So
didn't get a special wristband if you were vaccinated?
No.
Yeah.
They probably should have done that. But yeah, people just walked in, and if you weren't vaccinated, you could take off the mask and there'd be no way to check.
Yeah, see, it's just that sort of like inconsiderate response. You're being so inconsiderate to your neighbors or to your community by doing it that way.
You should
Yeah.
be prevented from harming others. I think that
Yeah.
you should get to choose what happens to you.
What if like a kid wants plastic surgery? And the extreme case would be.
Oh no,
like,
this
would
sorry,
be.
finish your thought.
I was gonna say the extreme case would be like hormone replacement therapy to begin transitioning. If they can pass a competency
that's
test.
something that I was going to bring up, but I was like, that's going to be too much of my soapbox or.
No, I mean, I think that
topic.
is one of the major considerations that is important here.
There's places where they block people from even getting the hormone blockers. Like there's
puberty
an
blockers?
option. Yeah, like there's a puberty blocking option. Like and I think there's also an age limit there though.
Does that have any downsides? The puberty blockers?
Yes.
I would have to imagine that it would.
It depends on how long you're on it for. If you're delaying
Right, if it's
puberty
only
for
a
a
few
long time,
months.
there's like the possibility of complications. But I think like what you really need to weigh there is like the damage that will be done if this is a trans woman and is forced to go through a male puberty because you have to be 18 to be able to make decisions about it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like by the time you're 18.
It's too late.
There's already like stuff that's going to be expensive to reverse or even impossible. Your bone plates fuse.
Yeah,
And if we have these competency tests and you can show that you are mentally competent earlier in your teenage years, you could start getting on hormone replacement or whatever earlier because you can make your own medical decisions.
Yeah, I guess, and I only chose that just because it was a salient example, but in general, I'm thinking of just some sort of irreversible medical decision, and yet, yeah, I mean, I guess that is the accepted cost.
I mean, if you're 15 and you have shown that you are competent and you want a boob job, if you have the money for it,
People have brought up
your body,
as,
your choice.
like a counterpoint to, I don't know, let trans people get surgeries. They're like, oh, well, should we let people who want to amputate limbs do that? And I'm always like, yes, it's their body.
Yeah.
There is
You don't get to ban something because you don't find it aesthetically pleasing.
There's some extent there to where that is like a mental illness that can be treated without amputating the limb.
Yes,
Right.
but you should strongly encourage people to try to get treated rather than making their decisions for them.
Right. I just meant specifically the limb amputation because I do remember reading something about that a few years ago. And
Yeah, but like you can't. We don't have a pill that fixes trans people. So, like the only thing we have right now that works is transition. Let them
right.
transition.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking specifically the limb thing. Like, I wouldn't want to be the doctor that has to cut off someone's arm just because I know that whatever they're in trans-rejected therapy or something, right? There was the last thing with
I suppose
That would be really fucked up.
a surgeon could probably like say, this is against my conscience, I won't participate in the surgery.
I'm a big fan of that freedom. Abortion stuff is in the news. I don't think anyone should be required to do any surgery they don't want to do. And abortion's a tough one because
What about the thing where like people of a certain religion won't like provide?
So I was raised as Jehovah's Witness, and I was often in church given stories of these heroic young people who refused blood transfusions, or these adults who were willing and then did die because they wouldn't get a blood transfusion after a major accident or whatever. And every now and then there were stories about the horrible Satan-directed courts that would force blood transfusions onto minors, because even though the parents didn't want them to get it and the minors themselves didn't want to get it, the doctors would say, look, the parents are fucking stupid and the minor is not competent to make their own decision, so they are being forced to get blood transfusions. And like, I'm glad that they were forced to get the transfusions and they're alive now. I had heard many stories of adults that died because they wouldn't get blood transfusions. But on the other hand, if you're a competent adult and you're willing to die for your religious belief and you're not actually killing others, I don't know, I guess
I would want
that's
to
your
ban
decision.
it, but principles, like, I don't know. I stand by my principles.
And yeah,
I think that would be really like sad. I think that's really sad that people died.
yeah, I'm also on
That's their choice.
I'm also on the people should be allowed to kill themselves bandwagon. That suicide should be an option for people who want to do that, and this is kind of just like another case of that, right?
No, I think this is importantly distinct. This is because you're brainwashed into believing magic about blood. This is not because you're depressed.
Yeah, like I was actually thinking, I wonder if could you do a competency test for that, which is just like, do you believe in science-based medicine?
What's interesting is that does strike me as importantly discriminatory, and this is getting us kind of too far afield, and we've been here too long. But I would love that. Like, look, you have to be science literate to decide something like this. I almost don't want to make
science literate and still have a crazy religious belief. Lots of people do.
Yeah, I suppose. Some of the
people that chose to die because they wouldn't have blood transfusions were literate, but the courts were like, okay, you have this sincere religious belief, so even though it's going to kill you, you are allowed to make that decision as an adult.
I'm in favor of the courts and the hospitals overriding the wishes of the children and the stupid adults to give blood transfusions to youngsters who needed them, right? And it sucks because that kid might think he's going to hell or something, right? Which is stupid. But the whole thing about it is stupid. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not going to let some kid die just because he's got dumb parents.
No, I agree. Minors can and should have that decision overrided. But once you are treated as an adult with your own rights, even if you're 15, if you've proven that you're competent to make decisions for your own life, the choice to die is one of those.
Yeah. My last thought was, and it's not related to adulthood or competency or anything, but it was the puberty blocker thing. The reason that I knew without having to do research that it must have some side effects is because otherwise it sounds not like an immortality pill, but like a longevity pill for sure, because you start aging a lot more once you're post-reproductive age, right? So if you never hit that, because you keep pushing it back for years.
No, you can't prolong your adolescence indefinitely with this. Like, it just
it puts you from 50 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour or something, right?
Well, it's more like you need hormones. So estrogen and testosterone are important for...
How long can you delay it?
We don't know.
We should find out.
It's hard to do it without doing experiments with people. Yeah.
But like, you need hormones in order to complete your development into an adult body and like, and be healthy. So you need to get one or the other.
But adult bodies age into decrepitude. So if you never get there, you can just stay young and 11 forever.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
That would be awesome if it worked like that. I think it does not.
I think it doesn't either. They would have figured this out in rats or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was fun. I found the case compelling, certainly for large parts of it. I would have to go back through. We have a lot of notes, way more than usual.
Oh, there's a lot of things I didn't touch on.
Yeah.
One of the things here near the bottom was like the enemies of this progress. A lot of government agencies are just have power to control teens, and they won't want to give that up.
Yeah, there's incentives to
churches,
keep them out of the workforce.
Yeah, a lot of churches have incentives. The labor unions and various other places have incentives to keep them out of the workforce.
We talked last time about the laws that give parents veto power over their kids' sex lives.
Yep. There's a lot of industries that cater specifically to the culture that develops when you have a captive population that can't do anything interesting, but that is still given money by their parents. And those would probably strongly oppose this. He lists a lot of teen spending numbers in here as well.
Yeah, they market really high. Like it's weird that the teen culture is sort of a product of this marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's sort of self-perpetuating in this creepy way.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey teens, you're these like sad, mopey, depressed people, right? Like, you know what'll make you feel better about your shitty situation? New pair of shoes.
Yeah. I will. I mean, on the one hand, I'll kind of miss a lot of the art that comes out of this traumatizing period, because trauma often makes the best art. and I was really into the angry,
there will always
screaming
be trauma.
type. Yeah, there will always trauma. That's true. But like,
I
was.
I do not think that this would make the world worse.
I think the world would be better by a lot, and sure, there'll be less art about this specific sort of trauma, but that's probably a good thing. Like, maybe if we had enforced rape culture or something, there'd be a lot of art about how terrible and traumatic that is, but that wouldn't be good. So
yeah, we don't want to invent new traumas to make better art.
Exactly. Yeah.
This was like the worst argument to try and like solve theodicy for me in my philosophy of religion class. Was like, oh yeah, now we know about the wisdom that was gained during the horrors of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Like, that is not a sufficient like benefit for the cost that we paid to get it.
Yeah.
And if anything, what you're saying is that if we could have, if more children could learn the lesson of the horrors of it, we should have let it go on for 10 years longer.
Right.
What, are you shitting me? She's like, well, I'm not saying that. Like, I think you are saying that. Tell me how you're not saying that. I remember this argument because I was like the only person making this case. This was in my like college philosophy of religion class.
Philosophy of religion?
Yeah.
Huh.
And I was the only person really making this argument, and I wasn't as brazen then as I am now. So I backed down fairly quickly, but I still wish I had challenged harder. It's not, I wouldn't have gained anything, but maybe I would have changed someone's mind or something.
Things that if you had a time machine, you'd go like make a stronger argument.
Right.
Think of some moments.
So real quick, other resources, youthfacts.org gives a whole bunch of data and information, and the National Youth Rights Association at youthrights.org is a place to go to help support these sorts of changes and do activism in this domain.
Hell yeah.
And there's various other ones too, but that was like the biggest central one that I found, so I'm just using that one.
Okay.
I like it. Yeah, I mean, I think the analogy to other minority groups pans out really well here. I remember this was an argument that I came across in another philosophy class. It was about animal liberation, but it was a quote from, I want to say it, an abolitionist during the 1800s. And it was like, look, even if what you're saying is true, that, my cup is only half as big as yours, am I not entitled to my little half measure? Mm-hmm. And the case was like, sure, an animal has a tenth the capacity, but why aren't they allowed to enjoy that 10% or whatever, right? If you look at the analogy to, again, women being able to work, in mass in 1940, that's insane. It's easy for people to forget that like,
it's not even that long ago.
You know people who were alive. You may know people who were alive at that time.
He draws direct comparison between laws protecting women and laws protecting teens, that women were considered weak, incompetent, feeble, and desperately in need of protection.
Protecting is a good word there, because we know it doesn't work for women, and so we're like, wait, why doesn't it work for teens? And it forces that dissonance. It forces you to face that dissonance.
Yeah, and he says now, 12% of the military is composed of women, 15% of law enforcement, and turns out these opinions can change in society, and these are stupid arguments.
Yeah, it's, can a 15-year-old carry as much, gear as a 35-year-old? Probably not.
Well, but if he can, then you let him join.
Well,
it's a competency test.
They need to carry some measure, right? Some portion of whatever. They probably don't need as many resources either, right? If you're carrying water or whatever, right? Yeah. So it's like, no, just like, let them do the thing. It makes, I think, like firefighting is like my favorite example, because it's like, look, it doesn't matter anything else, but can you lift this much weight? Can you deadlift a person?
Well, there's also with firefighting, like, I mean, I was in EMS, not fire, but I can't carry as much as the other people, but I can squeeze into a car and hold C-spine. And in firefighting, and war, it's useful to have someone with a small frame sometimes.
Yeah.
Or like more dexterous fingers. You having I get why, like, I don't know, there's the stereotype of like you want like a big strong man to fight the fires and.
But sometimes you
stuff.
don't.
But like sometimes you need some diversity.
Yeah, exactly. There's different jobs that need different.
Yeah, having child soldiers gives you the opportunity to fit into lots of small places.
Yeah, I was like actually thinking about child soldiers earlier.
But we're talking about young adult soldiers. That's different.
Yes. That's right.
All right.
So there's a lot of things we didn't touch on that are in my notes. I will go ahead and put them all up at at thebayesianconspiracy.com so that anyone can peruse them if they want. It turns out when I exported my notes to a more
shareable format,
Kindle told me that I had highlighted 4% of the book, and I was like, wow, that's actually a pretty decent percentage of this book. So yeah, there's a number of notes in here, and like I said, there's still 96% that I didn't cover or that I didn't highlight, so more for people to read if they want to actually get the book, Teens 2.0.
And you didn't read the second book either, which was called
The Case Against Adolescence.
That's right.
And that one is the more rigorous. Are you
still planning on reading it?
If I get the time, but I mean, there's another podcast episode in 2 weeks, and I still got my 9-to-5 job and all that other stuff, so I don't know.
We'll have you BI soon, don't worry.
Yes.
All right, I think we've gone on plenty long. I had a good time. Hope you guys did too. We got time to think of patron, though. You've got the notes up?
We always have time to think of patron, but I do not have the notes up now. Let me go find those.
Hey, so For this episode, we are thanking Clement. Or Clement. I don't know.
Our patron Clement helped provide this and make it possible to all of you, and we thank him very much for that, because you, our listeners, and Clement in specific this week, are what lets this happen.
Yay. Yeah, you rock. I don't know what... I mean, it sounds insincere because I sound tired, but I mean it. This is great, and thanks for helping bring this to the masses, including the young adults who have yet to be emancipated by society. Maybe this... I mean, it would be interesting. I maybe in 30 years this will be a thing, and,
I hope so.
I don't know. It just put me in a forward-thinking mood. So thanks for letting this conversation happen. You rock.
All right. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.